Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel somewhere truly disturbing. No dragons, no wars, no haunted castles, just the plain nose-wrinkling reality of Victorian hygiene. Or, more accurately, the absolute lack of it. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Not because of violence or ghosts, but because the smell alone would knock you flat. We're talking about a time when soap was suspect, toothpaste was, well, we'll get there, and flushing toilets were a bold fantasy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'll be here, imagining the scent of boiled cabbage and coal smoke. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in London, 1850. The very air greets you like an aggressive handshake from a stranger who hasn't bathed in a while. Equal parts fog, soot, horse manure, and the oily stink of too many bodies too close together. You take a cautious breath through your nose, regret it immediately, and try mouth breathing instead. Nope, worse. The air tastes like warm pennies and something faintly eggy. Welcome! Your shoes sink slightly into zin, as the slick layer of filth coating the cobblestones. It's a mix of ash hay, dung, spit, and whatever's been dumped out of windows lately. Speaking of which, splat! You sidestep instinctively, just as a chamber pot's worth of night soil crashes down onto the street nearby. A woman 2 floors up yells, "Gardyloo!" A full second too late. A common courtesy, supposedly. You're not dressed for the 19th century, so people are staring. But even if you were in period-appropriate wool and boots, they'd still know you're not from around here. You're way too clean. Your hair doesn't smell like smoke. You're not actively sweating brownish liquid through every layer of clothing. Suspicious. You wander down a market lane, everything is too close. Stalls, people, livestock. Yes, livestock. There's a goat eating what might be a shoe. A toddler with a runny nose and bare feet waddles by, holding a dead fish like a prize. It's unclear where the shops end and the chaos begins. And the smells, sweet decay from a fruit stall, raw blood from the butcher's block, and something acrid and smoky drifting from a nearby chimney sweep's cart. You consider breathing through your sleeve. It doesn't help. A fact for you, by the mid-1800s, London's population had ballooned to over 2 million. That's a lot of people, and even more body odour, in a city without working plumbing. The Thames served as both drinking water and open sewer. That's right, the same river. Imagine. The homes around you are stacked like mouldy bricks, narrow and leaning. Inside they're dark, humid and crawling with life, literally. Fleas, lice, rats the size of dachshunds. You hear scratching from behind a boarded window. Probably nothing. Definitely not a family of raccoons living behind the wallpaper. Raccoons weren't even native here. Yet somehow, you wouldn't be surprised. Let's talk about chimneys for a second. Every home has one, and they're rarely cleaned. So most are lined with soot and probably hiding several terrified children. Yes, children, forced to wriggle inside to scrape the insides clean. Their faces are always smudged black, their lungs permanently damaged by age 10. A quirky Victorian job, if potential death trap qualifies as quirky. You pause by a water pump where a line of people are filling buckets. A boy dips a tin cup and offers you a drink. Don't do it. The water looks okay, but it's crawling with bacteria. Germ theory isn't mainstream yet. People don't boil water. They assume bad smells cause disease, not invisible microbes. This is the golden age of the miasma theory, where if something sticks, it must be deadly. The irony, of course, is that plenty of things don't smell at all, but will kill you, like cholera, and lead pipes, and, well, most of what you're currently surrounded by. There's a polite little debate happening right now among 19th century scientists and city officials. Some think the city needs a massive overhaul of its sewage system. Others think that's an expensive waste, since the stink isn't what's causing the death toll. They argue in pamphlets, in Parliament and in newspapers, while corpses quietly pile up in the meantime. Spoiler, the reformers are right, but it'll take a few more years, and one very bad summer to force change. As you keep walking, you notice your skin feels sticky. Your hair's already greasy, even though it was fine an hour ago. That's just the city clinging to you, bonding like a needy ex, and you're barely 15 minutes in. A man with mutton chops bumps into you and mutters something unintelligible. His hat smells like pipe smoke. His coat smells like wet dog. He smells like everyone else. You want to flee, but instead you press forward. You're here for the long haul. 30 sections of historical grime, sweat, and the occasional bucket of mystery liquid dumped from above. Fun. Also, a weird detail. Victorians loved to cover smells more than eliminate them. Vinegar was big, so was lavender oil. And if you had money, you'd spritz yourself with something floral and hope no one noticed the BO underneath. In other words, hygiene was theatre. Scent was strategy. Actual cleanliness? Optional. You reach a city square where street performers are gathering a crowd. One man eats fire, another juggles rats. Seriously, rats. A cluster of ragged kids shout at him to make them dance. One throws a crust of bread which the rats chase with grim enthusiasm. You consider clapping, then realise your hands might stick together from whatever residue they've picked up already. Maybe later. And that's just day one. The moment you arrived, the city's grime started to own you. Your socks feel damp. Your breath tastes like coal. And your dignity, let's just say it's going the way of the Thames. But hey, at least no one expects you to smile. Dentistry is its own horror show, and we're saving that gem for a little later. You wake up, if we can call it that, wrapped in a coarse, itchy blanket that smells like wet sheep and ancient soup. You're lying on a lumpy straw mattress that sighs audibly under your weight, as though it too has had enough of Victorian life. The window is cracked open an inch for fresh air, which means you're getting an icy draught and the delightful aroma of manure soufflé wafting up from the streets below. Morning in 1842 London has arrived, and you are already regretting it. Now you need to bathe. That's what your 21st century brain insists anyway. But here's the thing. Nobody bathes daily, or weekly. In fact, a full bath might happen once a month, if you're wealthy, bored and mildly masochistic. And even then, the bath itself is less a cleansing ritual and more a process of stewing in your own grime like a human teabag. You look around your lodgings. There's no bathroom, no sink, no running water of any kind, just a dented pitcher of cold water sitting on a warped wooden table and a cracked ceramic basin beside it. This is your entire hygiene setup. You dip your fingers in and splash a bit on your face. It's not refreshing, it's freezing, vaguely metallic, and you're pretty sure you just woke up a colony of something microscopic. Downstairs, your host is boiling a kettle over the fireplace which doubles as heating, lighting, and minor cremation risk. She offers to warm some water for a bath, for a fee, of course. This involves dragging a zinc tub from the wall, filling it with several kettles of water, carried bucket by bucket from the well, and then guarding the door from nosy neighbours. Privacy is rare, warmth is temporary, and the bathwater? You're sharing it with everyone else in the household. Eldest first, then down the line. If you're last, you're basically dipping yourself into lukewarm soup. Here's a fun historical fact. The phrase "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" comes from this exact scenario. By the time the baby got its turn in the tub, the water was so murky you could genuinely lose a child in there. It wasn't metaphorical, it was just Tuesday. Let's say you go through with it. You sit in the tub, knees pressed to your chest, trying not to think about how many people have soaked in this water before you. The soap is a mysterious grey puck that smells like lard and sadness. It doesn't lather. It just smears across your skin like grease, which might actually be what it's made from. Your hair? There's no shampoo. Not really. You might get lucky and find a bar labelled hair soap, which is basically the same as the other soap, but in a different wrapper. Washing your hair in the Victorian era is an ordeal. First you soak it, then you scrub it with something alkaline, usually soap or a homemade solution of baking soda and vinegar, if you're feeling fancy. Then you try to rinse it out with cold, hard water that leaves your hair crunchy. You'll be picking soap chunks out of your scalp for days, which is probably why most people don't bother more than once a month. Speaking of hair, remember that quirky fringe fact? Victorians sometimes use stale beer or beef marrow to nourish their locks. That's right, beer on your head. The idea was that it added volume and shine. The result? You smell like a pub floor and attract every fly within a 5-mile radius. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate just how deeply people feared water during this time. Yes, water. Clean water. The prevailing belief among some medical professionals was that soaking your whole body too often could weaken your constitution or open your pores to disease. There were even doctors advising against baths during menstruation or pregnancy, claiming it could excite the nerves. So instead, you freshen up with a dry cloth, a prayer, and maybe a little lavender. And it's not just you, the entire city is winging it on hygiene. Even the upper classes, the ones with gold-framed portraits and chairs no one's allowed to sit in, aren't bathing like you'd expect. Queen Victoria herself reportedly took few full baths, favouring quick sponge downs and generous amounts of perfume. That's the elite solution. Just mask the funk, drown it in roses and ambergris. Scholars are still debating how common regular bathing truly was. Some argue that working-class families made time for weekly wash-ups, especially after labour-heavy jobs. Others insist that such practices were rare, inconvenient and socially discouraged outside of medical necessity or religious ritual. The truth? Probably a mix, but either way, no one smells good. At best, people smell like they've tried. And you? You're standing there, damp, freezing, and only slightly cleaner than when you started. Your towel is a rough length of cloth that exfoliates you into a new personality. Your skin is now red and tight. Your scalp itches, and the back of your knee feels like it's sprouting a new species of fungus. You towel off and get dressed again. Same clothes, of course. Laundry is its own nightmare, we'll get there. So you basically wear your outer layers until they achieve structural integrity. Like armour. If you're lucky, you have a fresh undershirt. If not, well, your outerwear will just have to absorb the consequences. Stepping back into the street, you realise with deep resignation that no one notices you're clean. You went through all that, and you still smell like fireplace and despair within minutes. But hey, now you get to spend the rest of the day in damp boots and underlayers that cling in all the worst ways. Bathing in the Victorian era isn't refreshing, it's not relaxing, it's barely functional. It's a mix of awkward logistics, communal embarrassment, and vague fear that you're harming your body with every wash. Honestly, you're not sure you want to try it again. And yet just wait. Because compared to the alternatives, especially what you'll see in public baths, today's little zinc tub might start to feel like a spa day. You've officially dried off, changed into the same crusty shirt you wore yesterday, and now it's time to deal with your hair. Yes, that situation. After your semi-bath, your scalp feels weird. Half oily, half stripped, like it's confused about what decade it's in. You pat your head and your hair crackles slightly. That can't be good. You reach for the hairbrush provided by your boarding house. It's made of wood, rough bristles, and the accumulated strands of several previous users. Lovely. There's something sticky on the handle. You try not to think about it. Victorian personal grooming is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone really. So let's talk about the hair washing schedule of the average 19th century person. If you thought monthly bathing was rare, hair washing was even more so. Once a month would be ambitious. Once every couple of months, that's more like it. For many, the solution to greasy hair was to brush it. A lot. You sit by the window dragging the coarse brush through your scalp and wondering how many Victorian children got concussions trying to tame a tangle. For shampoo, there isn't any. Not in the modern sense. If you're rich and a little experimental, you might mix egg yolks, brandy, and a splash of rainwater into a thick, questionable paste. The rest of the population just uses the same basic soap they use for everything else. Bodies, dishes, laundry, regrets. This miracle bar doesn't just clean, it also dries your hair into straw and leaves it smelling like old lard. Charming. Some historical recipes call for additions like rosemary vinegar or castor oil, though that last one makes your hair slick enough to qualify as a weapon in close combat. Speaking of oil, here's a quirky little gem. One popular Victorian hair tonic was made of bear grease. Real bear. Allegedly great for hair growth. Probably better for attracting actual bears. Once you're done brushing, you start noticing the lice, or at least you imagine you do. Everyone had them. Lice, fleas, nits, the whole parasitic party. It wasn't shameful, it was just life. There were even special fine-toothed combs for nit picking, which sounds cute until you remember what that actually involves. You picture some poor kid sitting by candlelight, their mother scraping through their scalp like she's panning for gold. You catch your reflection in the cracked mirror. Your hair is now fluffy in all the wrong places, flat where it shouldn't be, and somehow both frizzy and wet. You consider trimming it, but realise the only scissors around are the rusty ones used for tailoring and possibly minor surgery. Pass. Men at least had the fallback of pomades. These were thick, waxy concoctions used to slick the hair down into rigid styles that didn't move for days. Sometimes they were made with petroleum jelly, sometimes beef fat, sometimes mysterious oils with names like Macassar. In fact, Macassar oil was so ubiquitous and so greasy that people started placing decorative cloths over the backs of chairs to protect the upholstery. They were called antimacassars. The Victorians literally invented a furniture accessory just to deal with your greasy head. You step outside again, hair feeling heavier than it did 20 minutes ago, and you instantly blend in. The city is full of unwashed heads. Some are tucked under bonnets, others hidden by top hats, but they all share that slightly singed, vaguely animal aroma. Hair in this era is more about containment than beauty. If it's tied back, pinned up, or plastered into place, you're doing fine. Now here's where it gets strange. Victorians were absolutely obsessed with hair. Not washing it, mind you, but keeping it. It was common to collect hair from loved ones, weave it into jewellery, or even incorporate it into art. You might see a framed picture on someone's wall and the floral design. It's all made of carefully knotted human hair. Morbid? Maybe, but in an age of high mortality and low photography, a lock of hair was often the only tangible keepsake. Some even believed in the health benefits of brushing 100 strokes a day. It wasn't just about smoothing knots. It was a ritual. A moment of vanity in a world of grime. Ladies would sit by the fire and brush until their arms were tired, hoping to bring a little lustre to hair that hadn't seen water since Christmas. Of course, there's scholarly debate about how often people truly cleaned their hair. Diaries and etiquette guides suggest that some upper-class women washed their hair more frequently. But these references are rare and often vague. Did they mean a full wash or just a rinse? Did servants do the work? Or were people simply reporting the idea of cleanliness more than the reality? As usual with history, we're left piecing together the puzzle from gossip, letters, and the occasional suspiciously shiny portrait. You pass a barber shop, more of a corner shack with a blood-stained apron hanging on the door. Inside, a man is having his beard trimmed with what looks like garden shears. You notice there's also a bowl of leeches in the corner. Of course, barbers were also surgeons in this era. You get your sideburns cleaned up and your boils drained in the same appointment. For women, hair was a project, long, heavy, intricately styled, and often fake. Extensions made of horsehair, wire frames, and leftover braids from friends or relatives were all common. You might spend 2 hours assembling your look in the morning and still have it collapse if the humidity rose by lunchtime. And since there was no hairspray, people used starch, pins, and pure determination to hold their hairstyles in place. You finally settle on tying your hair back. No pomade, no beer rinse, no bare fat. Just a ribbon from the bedside drawer and a hope that the wind doesn't reveal too much scalp. There's something oddly comforting about knowing everyone around you is equally greasy. In Victorian London, personal appearance isn't about standing out. It's about surviving. You don't need to be the best groomed person in the room. You just need to not smell worse than the livestock. Still, you miss your shampoo, your conditioner, your 3-step shower routine. But for now, you'll settle for knowing that at least your hair isn't held together by animal fat and false hope. Yet, you're feeling semi-human now, kind of. You've scraped the grime from your limbs, tortured your hair into obedience, and endured the psychological horror of community bathwater. But there's still one area you haven't dealt with yet. Your teeth. You catch your reflection again in the cracked mirror and flash yourself a smile. That's a situation. Time to brush or scrape, or whatever the Victorians did to avoid their teeth turning into a mouthful of stalactites. You dig it around the bedroom drawer and find what passes for a toothbrush. It's wooden, stiff, and possibly haunted. The bristles are made from animal hair. Horse hair if you're lucky, pig bristle if you're not. Or worse, a mystery blend. You hold it up to your face and immediately start negotiating with yourself. Do you really need to brush? Could you maybe just swish some vinegar and call it a day? But no, you've come this far, you're going full Victorian, so in goes the bristly horror. There's no tube of toothpaste, of course. Instead, you're offered a small ceramic jar labelled dentifrice. Inside is a grey, chalky powder that smells vaguely like charcoal and mint. Some versions were just baking soda and crushed brick. Others included powdered cuttlefish bone or even burned bread. There's a hint of soot in this one, likely leftover ash from last night's fire. Congratulations, your dental hygiene routine is also doubling as chimney cleaning. You dab your horrifying brush in the soot mixture and scrub. It tastes like sand and regret. The bristles bend unevenly and stab your gums, but the powder has an oddly pleasant, cooling aftertaste. Thanks to a sprinkle of peppermint oil, probably added as an afterthought to distract you from the overall experience of brushing with rocks. Now let's talk about toothpaste alternatives. Some families made their own. Recipes included things like crushed eggshells, salt, and even powdered charcoal, long before Instagram made it trendy. If you were a gentleman with a flair for self-destruction, you might have rinsed your mouth with ammonia. It brightened the teeth, yes, but at the cost of your enamel, dignity, and probably a few brain cells. Here's a charming fringe detail. Some wealthier folks used tooth soap, a literal soap bar meant for dental use. It didn't foam, it didn't taste good, and it left your mouth feeling like you'd licked a candle. But it was fancy, which mattered. And if you really wanted to show off, you might carry a silver tongue scraper. Just something to casually whip out during dinner parties. Nothing screams refinement like scraping plaque in front of the pudding course. Dentistry in this era was, let's say, adventurous. Tooth pain, your options were limited. There were travelling tooth pullers who'd yank your molars out in town squares while playing the fiddle to distract you. No anaesthesia, no sterilisation, just a strong arm and a wrench that doubled as a hammer. For a few coins, they'd even let you keep the tooth as a souvenir. Who needs Novocaine when you've got showmanship? If you were middle class, you might visit a barber surgeon who doubled as a dentist. These were guys who cut hair, pulled teeth, set bones, and occasionally bled patients with leeches. True multitaskers. They rarely washed their hands, reused instruments without cleaning, and generally made things worse. But hey, at least they wore a vaguely professional-looking smock. The wealthy had more options. Actual dentists who used gold fillings, porcelain caps, and horrifying mouth props. Unfortunately, they often believed in things like mercury treatments and electric shock therapy for jaw pain, so, again, maybe not a huge improvement. You take a swig from a denture cleaning tonic that smells like fennel and nail polish. It burns your tongue but leaves a slightly herbal aftertaste. Refreshing, in a witch's potion kind of way. Now, here's the big scholarly debate. How bad were Victorian teeth really? Some argue that since sugar wasn't as omnipresent in every food group, cavities were less common. Others point out that diets were high in coarse grains and acidic foods, and people often cracked or wore down their teeth from biting into unprocessed, hard fare. Historical skeletons show a mix, some remarkably intact mouths, others resembling broken piano keys. But what everyone agrees on is this. When teeth did go bad, it was brutal. You pass a shop window advertising artificial teeth. The display includes a creepy velvet tray lined with porcelain molars and what looks like a full set of dentures made from real human teeth. Yes, real. Donated? No. Stolen. From the dead. Often from battlefields, freshly buried corpses, or executed prisoners. Waterloo teeth were a literal thing, pulled from young soldiers who died in the Napoleonic Wars and sold to rich Victorians desperate for a decent smile. You wonder if the guy who smiled at you earlier had a mouthful of French lieutenant. It's a weird thought, but somehow it fits right in with the ambience. Fluoride wasn't in use yet, neither was floss. Mouthwash was mostly alcohol or vinegar. People believed bad breath was a character flaw, moral failing even, not a hygiene issue, so instead of brushing more, they'd chew cloves or carry little scented sachets to breathe through in polite company. Breath mints existed, but they were more like chalky candies, and if they didn't mask the stench, well, you could always blame your diet or blame bad humours. You finish brushing. Your gums are bleeding slightly, but your mouth feels cleaner. Sort of. At least the soot paste did its job. You rinse with a splash of water from your cup and instantly feel the cold sting of something not quite right. Maybe it's the iron, or maybe it's the ghost of every unwashed Victorian mouth haunting this room. You decide to keep your mouth shut for the rest of the day. Not out of shame, but because you're starting to suspect even talking too much might qualify as dental trauma in this era. At least now you understand why people in old portraits never smile. Between rotting teeth, cracked molars, and the fear of sudden extraction, a closed-mouthed smirk was the safest bet. And really, who had the energy to look cheerful when their mouth was a war zone? One last tip before you step out. If someone offers you tooth powder that fizzes on contact, run. It probably contains hydrochloric acid. Brightens your smile right up until your teeth dissolve. Now that your hair is freshly tortured and your teeth have been roughly sandblasted with soot and regret, it's time to face the next frontier of Victorian discomfort. Clothing. More specifically, the underlayers. Because while everyone loves to romanticize the high collars, bustles and long coats of the era, no one wants to talk about what's happening underneath. Brace yourself, because you're about to experience a very personal kind of horror, Victorian underwear. You rummage through the trunk beside your creaky bed and pull out your daily undergarments. There are stiff yellowing linen drawers that tie at the waist with a string. No elastic, no softness, and, here's the kicker, no crotch seam. Yes, they're completely open at the bottom, a feature, not a flaw. Welcome to the world of split-crotch drawers, convenient for chamber pots, wildly inconvenient for dignity, and they are not, under any circumstances, washed daily, or weekly. In many working-class homes, underwear gets a rinse only when absolutely necessary. You might wear the same underclothes for several days, sometimes rotating between two sets if you're lucky enough to own more than one. Laundry, you'll quickly learn, is a whole production involving boiling water, caustic soap, and the physical stamina of a blacksmith. So most people simply opt to air out their underthings near the fireplace and call it good enough. You pull them on, trying not to imagine who else has worn these before you. Because yes, clothes, including underclothes, were often shared or handed down. Siblings shared drawers. Servants wore whatever was available. And thrift shops, or rag-and-bone men, sold bundles of second-hand garments, some of which came directly from the dead. That shirt you found yesterday? There's a non-zero chance it's seen its previous owner buried in it. Briefly, now you add a chemise, a thin linen shift worn to protect your actual outer clothes from body sweat and, let's be honest, grime. These are your base layers, the only thing separating your skin from wool, soot and horsehair. For women, this means corsets, petticoats, stays, and sometimes even padded bust enhancers. For men, it's layers of shirts, waistcoats, and thick drawers. And wool. So much wool. You already feel overheated just standing there, fully clothed but somehow still clammy. The garments cling in awkward places and leave gaps in others. Everything chafes. Your shirt collar is so stiff it might file your chin off by sundown, and the trousers feel like they were tailored by someone with a deep grudge against knees. Fun fact, most Victorian-era clothes were not made for comfort. They were designed to maintain modesty and social order. Even children were stuffed into layers of restrictive garments. Toddler boys wore dresses until they were breeched, usually around age 5 or 6. Girls were corseted young to train their posture, because nothing says childhood like rib compression and lightheadedness. Now you might be wondering, how did anyone survive summer in all this? The answer? Poorly. People fainted. A lot. Especially women in corsets, which were tightly laced and worn daily under multiple skirts and bodices. Some doctors argued corsets were responsible for a range of ailments from fainting to organ displacement. Others claimed they were necessary for moral posture. Yes, morality apparently lived in your spine alignment. There's ongoing scholarly debate about just how dangerous corsets actually were. Some historians say the horror stories were exaggerated by reformers trying to shock the public. Others point to X-rays of corseted skeletons and period medical journals documenting fainting, shortness of breath, and digestive nightmares. It's likely both are true. Some women laced tightly for fashion or vanity, while others wore them looser, more like back support belts. But in either case, it wasn't a breathable experience. As you step outside into the crowded morning streets, you quickly realise your outfit, while appropriate, is doing absolutely nothing to keep you clean. In fact, it's becoming a sort of walking sponge. The dust from passing carts clings to your sleeves, a splash from a passing bucket horse cart gets your hem, and someone sneezes way too close to your shoulder. You're already due for another change. Good luck with that. You pass a woman hanging laundry on a line. The clothes are yellowed and stiff, steaming faintly in the chill air. She's using a flat iron heated on a coal stove and pinning each item carefully. But you notice something curious. No underclothes. That's because, for modesty's sake, people didn't hang drawers or chemises where others could see them. Underwear was considered shameful, even when clean. It had to be dried discreetly indoors, usually in front of the fireplace or behind a screen. Yes, wet socks on the line were fine, but underpants? Outrageous. You keep walking, now fully clothed and uncomfortably aware of your body heat. It's like wearing a portable sauna made of wool, damp linen, and button-down shame. The stiffness of the garments means your movement is slightly mechanical. You feel like a poorly dressed puppet, and it's not even lunchtime. Here's something peculiar. The word hygiene doesn't even exist in the way you know it. Cleanliness is seen as moral and social, not medical. So while your underthings may be crusty and biologically alarming, as long as your outer garments are presentable and you don't look like you smell, you're socially acceptable. Appearances are everything. You catch sight of a vendor selling corset laces and ladies' necessities. One package promises to prevent fainting with strategic tension. It's a ribbon with a slightly elastic thread woven in, early spandex sort of. Another package claims to preserve virtue and silhouette. You don't ask, you don't want to know. Back in your room that evening, you begin the slow process of undressing, which is as exhausting as putting the clothes on in the first place. Every layer comes off with a soft sigh, like it's been waiting to breathe. You shake out your chemise and it releases a small cloud of dust. Maybe it's flour, maybe it's ash, maybe it's your will to live. You consider airing your undergarments by the fireplace like your host suggested, but then you remember that time she accidentally singed her bloomers, so instead you drape everything over the edge of your bed and pray that no one looks too closely, or too long. Victorian underwear wasn't about comfort, it was about form, modesty and surviving the season without boiling alive in your own clothes. And the real horror? You'll have to do it all again tomorrow. You wake to the sound of distant hooves and someone coughing like they're trying to expel their entire skeleton. The fire has gone cold, and your linens feel as though they've absorbed every particle of damp air in London. Your underclothes, which you aired by the hearth with cautious optimism, are now crispy in the wrong places and still suspiciously moist in others. It's a new day, and that means one thing: soap. You're finally going to find some actual honest-to-goodness soap. But Victorian soap is not the bar of lavender-scented self-care you're dreaming of. You quickly learn that there are two kinds of soap in this era: fancy soap for people who have servants, and everyone else's soap, which is one wrong ingredient away from being industrial lubricant. You know which one you're about to meet. You venture into the general store, which smells like dust and pickled onions. The soap is kept on a wooden shelf between a stack of wax tapers and a jar of questionable molasses. The bar you're handed is greyish-brown, slightly squishy, and gives off the unmistakable scent of ashes, animal fat, and a hint of lye. It's not wrapped. It's not labelled. It's just soap. You buy it anyway because the alternative is going back to brushing your armpits with a damp rag and positive thinking. Back in your cramped room, you prepare for what can loosely be described as a wash-up. You place your soap beside the crack basin of cold water and try to psych yourself up. This is not going to be fun. You know this because Victorian soap is notoriously harsh. It's made by boiling animal fat with lye, a caustic substance that can, in the wrong quantities, dissolve flesh. In theory, the soap maker balances the mix perfectly. In reality, your bar feels like it might take your skin off along with the grime. You lather it in your hands and immediately regret everything. The suds are minimal. It sort of foams, but only after aggressive rubbing, and even then it behaves like it's attacking you. The smell doesn't improve with use. If anything, it intensifies. You catch hints of boiled cow and something vaguely metallic. A smell that implies the soap remembers its previous life as part of a livestock accident. Victorians were serious about their soap. Serious in that they believed it should be strong enough to remove not just dirt, but also shame, sin, and possibly your top layer of skin. You scrub your arms, wincing as the soap bites into a scratch you didn't know you had. Your fingers are raw within minutes, and your elbows feel like they've been sandblasted. Some people in this era believed soap had moral value. The cleaner you were, the more righteous. This idea was pushed especially hard by upper-class reformers who distributed soap to the poor, thinking it might cleanse not only bodies, but souls. The soap was often accompanied by a Bible verse and a lecture about virtue. You wonder if they ever actually used the stuff themselves. Doubtful. You rinse off with the coldest water this side of an Arctic expedition and pat yourself dry with a rough towel that resembles burlap in both texture and comfort. Your skin feels oddly tight, like it's trying to retract into your bones. The bar of soap, now dented and oozing slightly, sits smugly in its dish. You cover it with a scrap of cloth just to avoid making eye contact. Let's pause here for a quirky fact. Victorians also used soap for the weirdest things. Some believed that placing a bar of soap in your bed could prevent leg cramps. Others carried slivers in their pockets as a folk cure for bad luck. And one particularly charming bit of pseudoscience involved inserting soap suppositories to cure constipation. Yep, that happened. No one knows who came up with it, but someone probably tried it more than once. You pack the soap away, already dreading the next time you have to use it. But at least now you have the tiniest sense of accomplishment. You've joined the elite few who have washed with true Victorian grit, literally. Out in the street you start noticing who else is freshly scrubbed. or attempting to be. A few men carry bars wrapped in muslin tucked into their coat pockets like badges of virtue. Children sell soap door to door, offering blessed versions said to heal both the body and the spirit. There's even a travelling soap man who shouts rhymes about cleanliness and occasionally bursts into impromptu sermons. Still, most people don't use it daily. Soap costs money. Water takes effort. And for many, the idea of washing every day is excessive, even suspicious. Some think it weakens the body. Others just don't have the time. And plenty of Victorians still adhere to the idea that if you look clean enough, that's what counts. Real cleanliness is for Sundays, job interviews, and when you're trying to marry up. Of course, scholars have long argued over how widespread soap use really was. Some letters and diaries suggest that working-class families used it frequently, especially women doing laundry. Others paint a grimmer picture, one where soap was scarce, expensive, and sometimes reserved for washing clothes rather than bodies. It probably varied, depending on region, class, and whether or not you lived near someone who made their own. And yes, some people made their own soap at home, which sounds charming until you realise it involves boiling animal bones and fat in a cauldron with wood ash, while praying you don't end up with explosive lye burns. It also smells worse than a cheese factory explosion. So you can understand why many opted to just stay dirty. By the end of the day, you're back to square one, cleanish, maybe. Your arms itch a little, your skin feels stripped, but your face no longer shines with coal dust and regret. You count that as a win. You wrap your soap in a clean rag and place it reverently in the drawer. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome, maybe it's the mild euphoria of not smelling like a barn. Either way, the bar's growing on you. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow brings the next challenge. The complicated world of chamber pots, slop buckets, and the fine art of window-tossed waste. The sun's barely up and already you're dealing with an existential crisis. It's not the soap this time, though that grey puck still haunts your senses. It's something more urgent. More primal. You have to pee, and perhaps more. And unfortunately, the concept of indoor plumbing hasn't quite caught on yet in your part of Victorian London. So today's little adventure begins with the humble and wholly unsanitary chamber pot. You glance over at the squat ceramic bowl sitting discreetly under your bed. It has delicate blue floral patterns on the outside, which is misleading considering its purpose. This pot, charmingly referred to as a goes-under, is your only in-room option for relieving yourself. There is no bathroom. There is no flush. This is it. The toilet is the bowl, and the walls are thin. You lift the pot with as much dignity as you can muster, which isn't much. There's already something sloshing at the bottom, probably yours from last night. Or maybe your host's. You don't ask, you just get on with it. Using a chamber pot is humbling. It's not graceful. There's balancing involved. Aim is critical. And if you mess up, well, there's no backup pot. Once finished, you stare at the pot, now a little fuller, and wonder what to do with it. That's when you remember the morning ritual. The dump. In a city still clinging to pre-plumbing infrastructure, disposing of human waste is a team effort. Households collect their slop buckets, chamber pots and other bodily byproducts and empty them out, preferably into a cesspit in the backyard. But not always. In cities, where cesspits overflow and get expensive to empty, many opt for a more direct route, the window. Gardez-l'eau, they shout, a bastardised cry from the French, regardez-l'eau, watch out for the water. Though let's be honest, it's not just water. You now understand the term night soil isn't poetic, it's very, very literal. You peek out your window. Below, the narrow alley is already slick with life. A man in a vest is tossing the contents of a large bucket straight into the street gutter. He gives a perfunctory yell before flinging the mess, and it hits the cobblestones with a slap. Steam rises. A cat bolts. A woman across the lane yells something indecipherable but angry, and now it's your turn. You awkwardly shuffle to the window, chamber pot in hand, trying not to spill. The scent is alive. You mutter something that sounds vaguely like Gardez-l'eau and toss. It lands with a wet thud and joins the flowing rivulet of city runoff. Congratulations, you've contributed to the ecosystem. But here's the kicker. This waste doesn't just disappear. It gathers in open gutters that line the streets, mixing with horse dung, rotting food, coal dust, and the occasional unfortunate rat. When it rains, it floods. When it's dry, the stench rises like a ghost. You step outside later and it immediately hits you in the face. a hot, organic wave of decomposition. A fun fact, some buildings actually had privies, brick outhouses tucked in corners of yards. These were little more than wooden seats over pits, and if you were lucky, they had doors. The pits were periodically emptied by night soil men, who dug through layers of human excrement and hauled it away in large barrels. Often in the dead of night, hence the name. These men were strong, strange legends, well paid and entirely shunned by society. No one invited a night soil man to dinner. Still, in cramped city buildings like the one you're in, chamber pots remained the norm. Public toilets didn't become common until well into the second half of the century. So if you were caught out and needed to go, you had limited options. Find a friendly shopkeeper, beg a stable boy for a corner stall, or just go behind something. Discretion was key. Modesty optional. Women had it worse. Corsets, layers of petticoats, and moral expectations made any sort of relief a full-blown operation. There were even specially designed urinettes, portable devices worn under skirts so women could relieve themselves standing up. Kind of like a porcelain funnel. Effective? Dignified? Absolutely not. There's a scholarly debate around just how disgusting the average street really was. Some argue that the horror stories were exaggerated by reformers and moralists looking to push for sanitation laws. Others point to court records, death tolls from cholera outbreaks, and the fact that London's entire water supply once flowed through this mess. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Some streets were tolerable, others were sewage slick nightmares. Either way, the smell was universal. You notice workers down the road laying thick gravel across a particularly foul stretch of road. This isn't for traction, it's to bury the smell. The technique is called macadamization, and while it helps with the stench temporarily, the waste is still there, just slightly muffled. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a tosher, a man waist deep in an open sewer drain. He's searching for valuables among the muck. Coins, rags, lost trinkets. Toshing is a real job, dangerous, disgusting and weirdly lucrative if you're lucky, but it also means daily exposure to every disease in the Victorian handbook, and you thought your job was bad. Some reformers, like the now famous Edwin Chadwick, were trying to fix this. He believed that clean cities would lead to healthier, more moral citizens. He published shocking reports detailing the living conditions of the poor with vivid descriptions of overflowing cesspools and children playing beside dead rats. It worked, eventually, but not before decades of people wading through rivers of filth to buy a loaf of bread. You return home that evening and clean out your chamber pot. Again, there's no special brush, no disinfectant, just cold water and a worn cloth you don't want to think too hard about. You rinse it as best you can and place it back under the bed, ready for tonight's encore performance. Victorian life was full of indignities, but few were as constant, as humbling, as the relentless bodily reminder that toilets were a privilege, not a right. You fall asleep with the faint smell of ammonia in the air and a new appreciation for plumbing. You've made it out the door again, chamber pot emptied, layers reassembled, hair shellacked into place by some unholy combination of lard and willpower. The morning air is thick, not with mist, but with something denser, more personal. You step into the street and it hits you like a physical object. A wall of odour so rich, so layered it could be bottled and sold as punishment. The streets are alive, not in the whimsical sense. No, this is a living, breathing tapestry of smells, textures, and questionable substances all mingling underfoot. You take one cautious step and feel your boots squish slightly. Not enough to soak, but enough to whisper threats. You don't look down. Nothing good ever comes from looking directly at Victorian cobblestones. You pass a grocer unpacking crates of fish that may or may not still be fish. The air around his stall pulses with a scent that makes your eyes water. To your left, a coal cart has tipped slightly, spilling black dust across the road. A child immediately rolls in it for fun. You're not even sure he notices. He's probably coated in enough soot already that the difference is cosmetic. And then there's the horses, dozens of them, pulling carts, standing idle, or just relieving themselves with total indifference to social decorum. You sidestep a fresh pile, only to walk straight into a cloud of steam rising from yesterday's contribution. Horse dung is everywhere, and it's not just an inconvenience, it's infrastructure. People plan around it. Children make games out of hopping over it. One man scoops it into a bucket, presumably for resale as fertiliser. He tips his hat at you like this is perfectly normal, which, to be fair, it is, and that's just one block. You keep walking, nose doing its best to retreat into your face. The smells come in waves. Smoke, fish, horse, sewage, body odour, cabbage, then strangely lavender. A woman with a small sprig pinned to her blouse passes you. You inhale like a drowning man and nearly weep. It fades immediately, replaced by the smell of something burning, probably bread, but maybe hair. Now, about those streets, they're paved, sort of. Cobblestones mostly, but the gaps between them are packed with mystery. Sludge, nails, bits of cloth, and things that were once edible. The gutters, if they can be called that, are deep enough to swallow a small child. Some are still filled with the morning's offerings from chamber pots above. You step carefully. A fringe fact for your troubles. London had an official position called the scavenger. These men were responsible for cleaning the streets, which they did with brooms, shovels, and a most tremendous sense of futility. At the worst areas, cleaning meant pushing refuse to the sides, forming little piles that the city might collect. Eventually, if it didn't rain first and turn everything into a thick, slippery soup, you see one such scavenger now. He's dragging a broken broom across the street, face wrapped in a scarf, not for fashion, but for survival. Behind him, a dog picks through a heap of spoiled produce. You make eye contact with the dog. It looks disappointed in you. Up ahead, you reach one of London's main thoroughfares. It's louder, busier, and somehow even smellier. The crowds press together, wool coats brushing against each other, hats tilted at defensive angles. You realise you're nose to nose with the back of someone's neck. They haven't bathed in a while, neither have you, really. And the collective effect is startling. You duck into a side alley to catch your breath. Mistake. The alley is narrower, darker, and serves as a sort of olfactory archive of every bad decision made in the last week. There's a dead rat, maybe two, a leaking pipe that smells like rot, and a bucket collecting mysterious drips from an overhead ledge. You don't ask questions, you just leave. Here's where things get dark. The smell isn't just gross, it's dangerous. Remember the miasma theory? In the Victorian era, people believed disease was spread through bad air. The theory wasn't entirely off the mark, after all. Foul air often came from contaminated water and decay, but it missed the real culprit, germs. Still, because of this belief, the foul-smelling streets weren't just unpleasant, they were terrifying. People feared the air itself could make them ill, and sometimes it did. That's the cruel irony. People dumped their waste in the street, lived surrounded by filth, then feared the consequences not because of germs, but because of stench. So efforts to clean the streets focused more on masking the smell than eliminating the cause. People lit incense, burned herbs, drenched their doorsteps in vinegar. One wealthy woman even scattered perfumed sawdust outside her home every morning. It helped, briefly. Then the next chamber pot came flying. And yet, for all this, life goes on. Street vendors still shout, hawking pies and eels and hot chestnuts. Children run barefoot through puddles you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot stick. A man plays a violin with 3 strings, his case open for coins and maybe sympathy. A preacher shouts about eternal salvation while standing next to a meat pie cart. The line between sacred and profane is thin here, and often smells like tripe. You notice something else too. The people around you have adapted. Their noses seem immune. They don't flinch at the odours, don't recoil at the mess. They've built up an olfactory tolerance that you, as a newcomer, will probably never achieve. To them, this is just air. Normal, everyday, full-bodied air. The kind you grow up in, the kind you stop noticing until someone new arrives and gags. You pass a bakery. For a brief, blessed moment, you smell bread. Real, fresh, almost clean bread. It doesn't last. A nearby tanner is boiling hides and dumping his runoff into a ditch. You try to cling to the memory of that bread smell like a lifeline. By the time you return home, you're covered in something. Dust, for sure. Maybe soot, possibly traces of things better left unidentified. You take off your coat and it releases a puff of smells that weren't there when you left. The streets have clung to you like a wet dog to a sweater. You feel filthy in a way that soap alone can't fix. But there's no time for wallowing. Tomorrow's problem is waiting in the form of a public bath, where the promise of cleanliness comes with a heaping side of communicable disease. It's the following day, and despite your best efforts to avoid it, you've reached that uncomfortable point where even the grime is starting to protest. Your armpits feel waxy, your knees are gritty, and there's something happening between your toes that defies science. You've already made peace with the fact that you'll never smell good in Victorian London, but the thought of feeling slightly clean again is tempting. Desperate, even. So you steel yourself for an experience you've been dreading since the moment you arrived, the public bath. Now, don't get your hopes up. This is not a spa. There are no scented oils, no cucumber water, no warm towels folded into origami animals. Victorian public baths are utilitarian at best, and a medical hazard at worst. Still, they were a step toward public hygiene, introduced in the mid-1800s as part of a modest movement to encourage cleanliness among the working class. It's admirable in theory. In practice, you'll see. You find the entrance tucked between a butcher and a pawn shop, marked only by a damp wooden sign that says Public Baths and Wash House, Men's Side. You walk in and are immediately assaulted by the steam that smells like wet plaster and old shoes. The clerk behind the counter, a woman with calloused hands and a permanent scowl, gives you a once-over that says, "You're definitely in the right place." You pay your fee, 2p plus a deposit for the tello. She slides you a token, a grey towel that feels more like a curtain, and a small bar of soap that appears to have been cut from a larger brick. It's still warm from someone else's hand. You choose not to dwell on that. The changing room is a narrow corridor lined with hooks and benches. You hang your coat, avoiding eye contact with the other bathers, most of whom are in various stages of undress and resignation. The floor is slippery with a slick sheen of water, grime, and the occasional mystery puddle. You step carefully. Once you're stripped down, you're shown to your cubicle. It's a tiny tiled stall with a battered tin tub, a wall spigot that leaks continuously, and a window too small to escape through. Unfortunate, because you're already contemplating escape. The bath is already filled halfway with warmish water. You hesitate. It's cloudy, not opaque exactly, but not what you'd call inviting. You reach in and swirl it with a finger. It's not boiling, that's something. Here's the thing about public baths. They were often shared. Not at the same time, thankfully, but one after the other. Water might be changed every few bathers, or not. It depends on the attendant's mood and how long the line outside is, which means you are, at this very moment, slipping into a stranger's leftover bath. The soap doesn't lather. It just kind of dissolves into a film that floats on the surface like a skin. You rub it into your arms, your chest, your neck. Every scrub brings up new textures. You don't ask what they are. You keep your eyes closed and focus on the sound of dripping water and your own rapidly diminishing will to live. Suddenly there's a knock on the wall. "Time's up in 5, a voice calls. You've barely begun to question your life choices, and already you're being evicted. That's how these places work. You're allowed maybe 10-15 minutes tops, enough time to dunk, scrub, rinse, and contemplate every poor decision that led to this moment. Then out you go. You stand and the water swirls around you in a deeply unsettling shade of greyish beige. You grab your towel, which is now damp from steam and possibly age, and try to dry off as fast as you can. Your skin squeaks under your fingers. Not clean exactly, but less tacky. You count that as progress. Now, the towel. It's supposed to be returned, but you're tempted to set it on fire and leave it as a warning for future generations. Instead, you drop it in the laundry basket and step back into the corridor, where the wet floor now feels colder, and your feet pick up every bit of grime the bath was supposed to wash away. The communal changing room, by the way, is a minefield of awkward. You navigate it like a cautious raccoon, eyes forward, arms close, trying not to touch anything or anyone. Victorian modesty is a paradox. It demands full bodily coverage in public, but offers very little privacy in spaces like this. A man 2 hooks down from you is loudly discussing the benefits of pine tar soap, which he claims keeps the fleas at bay. You nod politely and leave as soon as possible. Outside, you take your first breath of fresh air. It still smells like coal dust and cabbage, but at least it's not a steam bath of communal skin stew. You glance back at the bathhouse, wondering how often the place is cleaned. Spoiler, not often. Cleaning was done with quick splashes of cold water and the occasional sweep. Disinfectant wasn't widely used because germ theory wasn't entirely accepted yet. Most people thought the smell was the problem, not the bacteria. So they added carbolic soap to the mix, or burned herbs, and called it sanitation. Some public bathhouses even doubled as laundry facilities, and the water sometimes did double duty. One stall over might be scrubbing socks while you're scrubbing your pits. Efficiency, sure. Hygiene, less so. Historians argue about how much the poor really used these bathhouses. Some say they were welcomed as rare sanctuaries of warmth and privacy. Others claim they were underused due to stigma, costume, and a deeply ingrained mistrust of charity cleanliness. Many people still prefer to wash at home with a basin and rag, even if it meant less water and more inconvenience. And can you blame them? Back in your room, you peel off your socks, still damp from the street, and stretch out on the straw mattress. Your skin has that raw post-bath tightness. Not clean exactly, just temporarily sanitized. You think about modern showers and pressurized taps with actual water pressure and scented shampoo that doesn't double as industrial degreaser. You try not to cry, but there's a small comfort in knowing you survived it. You dunked your body into a stranger's bathwater, scrubbed yourself with second-hand soap, and walked out the other side only moderately traumatized. Tomorrow, though, you're going to wish for that bathhouse again. Because next comes the outdoor toilet experience known as the backyard privy. And spoiler, you're going to miss the chamber pot. You wake up stiff, itchy, and already a little damp, not from sweat or spilled water, but from the heavy morning air that seems to condense directly onto your skin. You stretch, wince, and feel that unique Victorian stickiness beginning to settle in your joints and underarms. You briefly consider skipping your morning relief and pretending your bladder doesn't exist. But you know better. The pot under your bed is full from last night's use and already releasing a faint ammonia tang. It's time to face the next circle of sanitation hell. The backyard privy. You dress quickly, same clothes, same underthings. There's no such thing as a fresh outfit every day, unless you're rich, obsessive, or running a nudist cult on the sly. The air outside your door greets you with the familiar punch of chimney smoke, fried kidneys, and manure. You take a deep breath. It's not the worst thing you'll smell today. The privy is in the yard behind your lodging house. To get there, you navigate a narrow corridor between buildings, dodging laundry lines, coal piles, and a dog who seems permanently annoyed by your presence. The ground is damp, not with rain, but from a mixture of wash water, spilled slop, and the steady leak of something from upstairs. You don't look up, you don't want to know. There it is. A grey, tilting wooden shed with a door that barely latches and a roof that's clearly more decorative than functional. This is your destination, the outdoor toilet. The privy, it's a hole in a bench, which is itself set above a pit of unfathomable depth and smell. There's no flush, of course, just gravity and hope. You push open the creaking door. The inside is dark even in daylight. There's no window, no ventilation, just a small crack in the boards that lets in a sliver of light, and unfortunately, a generous number of flies. You step in, holding your breath and your coat collar over your nose. The stench is instant and muscular, like something alive trying to claw its way up from the pit. It smells like history and regret. The seat is rough wood, worn smooth in some places and splintering in others. Someone's tried to make it homey by adding a scrap of newspaper on a nail for wiping. There's no toilet paper, of course. It hasn't been invented yet. Well, it has, technically, but it's not in wide use. Not here. You get newspaper if you're lucky, corn cobs or moss if you're rural and creative. You lower yourself carefully, doing your best not to let your clothing brush anything. And then you sit. The experience is immediate, shocking, and oddly existential. The hole below emits a wave of heat that shouldn't be possible in cold weather. The flies swirl upward in a lazy cyclone of disgust. You stare at the door. You count the knots in the wood. You reflect on every decision that led to this exact moment. Privies weren't cleaned often. The waste built up over time, slowly filling the pit beneath the seat until someone, usually a night soil man, was paid to come and dig it out. That meant weeks, months, sometimes years of accumulation, depending on how lazy or broke the homeowner was. In some cases, people just built a new hole a few feet away and moved the shed over it. Then they'd cover the old pit with dirt and ideally never speak of it again. You do your business, trying to breathe through your mouth and focus on anything other than the rising steam from below. When you're done, you reach for the newspaper. Yesterday's penny dreadful, full of melodrama and serial murderers, a fitting end for such a noble purpose. Now comes the delicate task of redressing without touching anything. Victorian clothing, with its layers and fiddly buttons, was not designed for quick manoeuvring in tight spaces. You succeed, but not without brushing your coat sleeve against the side of the stall. You'll never emotionally recover. You stagger out into the morning light, blinking like you've just returned from war. Your body feels light, your soul slightly damaged. You breathe deeply and instantly regret it. The smell of the privy clings to your clothes like a passive-aggressive ghost. Time for a quirky fact to distract you. In some cities, especially in densely packed working-class areas, the privy wasn't even in a backyard. It was communal, shared between multiple families in a courtyard. If you've ever wanted to queue for a toilet at 3 a.m. in freezing rain with 8 strangers, this was your moment. And yes, there were debates about etiquette. Do you knock? Wait silently, light a candle? Hope the person inside doesn't pass out from the fumes? There was also the infamous pail closet system, a sort of halfway step toward indoor plumbing. Instead of a pit, the privy had a removable bucket which was emptied, in theory, daily. In practice, not so much. The result was an urban ecosystem where rats and disease mingled freely with domestic life. Scholars argue whether the outdoor privy experience was universally dreadful, or simply a way of life that people got used to. Some rural homes kept them tidy with fresh straw and regular emptying. In urban areas, though, the neglect was staggering. Cholera outbreaks, typhus, dysentery, all traced back to poor sanitation and overflowing pits. And people knew this. They didn't know about bacteria, but they understood that bad things came from bad smells. So they covered the walls in whitewash, burned sulphur, hung herbs from the ceiling, anything to mask the miasma. You notice back in your lodging house that their back door is now propped open to let the breeze clear the smell. It doesn't help. It just moves the stink into the kitchen. Your host shrugs and goes back to boiling offal on the stove. You sit by the fire and try to forget, but the memory lingers. The smell has embedded itself into your nostrils. Your coat sleeve will never be the same, and yet somehow you understand why people didn't complain more. They had nothing better. The alternative was a chamber pot, or if you were desperate, a back alley. The Victorian privy wasn't comfort. It was compromise. You'll probably be back there by evening. That's the most humiliating part. It's not just a one-time thing, it's a routine, a lifestyle, a partnership between you and a wooden box filled with decades of human waste. And you're starting to suspect the box is winning. Tomorrow, the discomfort continues, but this time you're trading the privy for corsets, underarm sweat, and the sticky reality of what being a Victorian woman meant when deodorant wasn't even a concept. You've suffered the privy. You've navigated soap that doubles as a skin removal agent and brushed your teeth with powdered brick dust. And yet you've only scratched the surface. Because if you think hygiene in Victorian London was bad for you, a relatively unremarkable individual just trying to stay under the radar, you need to experience what it was like as a woman. Not the corseted fantasy you see in period dramas, but the real deal. Spoiler, it's sticky, smelly, breath-constricting, and just a little bit soul-crushing. Welcome to the roughest ride in this entire series, Victorian womanhood without deodorant. It starts with the clothes. Oh, the clothes. You're up early, and your landlady has been kind enough to let you borrow a full day's outfit. It's laid out on the bed like a medieval torture exhibit. First comes the chemise, a linen undershirt worn against the skin to protect the more expensive layers from your body. In practice, it mostly collects sweat. Then drawers. Split crotch, of course, because nothing says practicality like an open-air undercarriage. Next, a corset. You hold it up and immediately feel a twinge in your ribs. It's tightly boned, stiff as gilt, and smells faintly of mildew and talcum powder. There are metal clasps down the front and a lacing panel in the back that requires the assistance of someone with either strong fingers or zero moral qualms. Your landlady helps. You stand still as she yanks and pulls, pausing only to ask whether you've eaten. It's not small talk. She's deciding how tightly she can cinch you before you pass out. The corset pulls everything in, your waist, your ribs, your ability to exhale. You try to take a deep breath and succeed only in sounding like a haunted accordion. Victorians considered this beautiful, fashionable. A tight waist meant status, control, and a body unspoiled by physical labour. But to you, it feels like being hugged by a very disappointed ghost. Over the corset goes a petticoat, then another petticoat, and finally a dress. Long sleeves, high collar, and about 20 pounds of fabric draped from neck to floor. You are now fully dressed and 90% flammable, and it's only 9 a.m. You step outside and the temperature is already climbing. Not dramatically, but enough to activate the unholy chemistry happening beneath all that fabric. You're sweating, profusely. But it's not the kind of sweat that evaporates. It gets trapped in your corset, in your petticoats, in the linen prison clinging to your torso. Every step feels like you're cooking from the inside out. And now the real kicker. There is no deodorant. Not really. The concept of blocking or neutralising body odour hadn't taken hold yet. Victorians did have perfumes and powders, but those were for covering smells, not preventing them. So your options are limited. Talcum powder? Sure. If you want to coat your armpits in something that turns to paste within minutes. A slice of lemon? Popular? Yes, but it stings like betrayal. You try it anyway. It doesn't help. You reach the market and immediately blend in with the crowd of other women, all layered in similar outfits, all slightly flushed, all moving like they're dragging the invisible sandbags behind them. No one smells good. There's the musty scent of old linen, a little sourness from overripe armpits, and a generous helping of coal smoke baked into everything. And yet no one says a word, because this is normal. This is expected. A woman doesn't talk about her body, she simply manages it, quietly, apologetically, and with the frequent blotting. You carry a small handkerchief, as every proper lady does. It's embroidered, elegant, and completely ineffective at stopping the sweat streaming down your back. You dab your forehead delicately, then press the cloth under your collar, trying not to draw attention. One sniff of your underarms tells you that you've already lost the deodorant war by mid-morning. Let's take a quick historical detour. In the 9th century, the idea of sweat glands producing bacteria-laced body odour wasn't widely understood. Uncleanliness was seen as a moral failing, and women in particular were held to impossible standards of purity and modesty. If you stank, it wasn't your hormones or your poorly ventilated underarms, it was your lack of discipline. Which is funny, considering that the very clothing required by society was designed to make you sweat and then trap it for maximum suffering. So what did women do? They layered perfumes. Lots of them. Lavender water, rose essence, crushed violets. Some even dabbed eau de cologne directly into their armpits. It masked the smell for about 10 minutes, after which the scent turned on you, mixing with the sweat to create a floral stench that somehow smelled worse than the original problem. Still, the bottles looked nice. A quirky tidbit for you, some women wore perfumed wax balls pinned to the inside of their dresses. Called pomanders, they were meant to absorb odour and emit fragrance throughout the day. In practice, they turned your armpits into potpourri closets that slowly melted onto your chemise. But they were all the rage for a while. You visit a dressmaker's shop and sit for a fitting. Within minutes, your back is soaked. The corset is digging in. You can't slouch. Victorian posture is practically a religion. You shift slightly and hear your underpinnings squeak. The woman fitting you doesn't blink. She's heard it all before. Probably smelled it too. Here's where it gets worse. You can't just freshen up. There are no public restrooms, no places to discreetly change a blouse or sponge off your armpits. You're expected to endure. To powder your face and powder your chest and never, under any circumstances, show signs of discomfort. Fainting was common, blamed on delicate constitutions, but usually caused by dehydration and overheating. One woman drops in the street as you pass, her dress fanning out like a fallen meringue. She'll be fine. They'll loosen her corset and feed her vinegar. There's scholarly debate about whether women really tolerated this every day. Diaries suggest some skipped the full regalia, unless they were going out or attending church. Others wore slightly looser corsets or lighter petticoats, but even at their most relaxed, the layers and expectations were unrelenting. Sweat-stained collars and underarm rashes were part of life. Hygiene was performative. You weren't supposed to be clean, you were supposed to appear clean. By the time you return home, your dress is damp, your chemise is sticking in all the wrong places, and your corset has left a dent in your torso that could double as a fossil impression. You peel off the layers, one by one, and lie down in just your drawers, praying for a breeze that never comes. You smell, not terrible, but not good, and you're too tired to care. You drift off thinking about lemons, perfume balls, and there's dozens of other women sweating in silent, corseted solidarity across the city. And you finally get it. Survival wasn't about beauty. It was about endurance. It's the hottest day of the summer so far, and you're already dreading what that means for your comfort, your hygiene, and whatever faint grip on dignity you've managed to maintain. The sun is glaring down like it has a personal vendetta. The sky is cloudless. The air is thick and unmoving. And you, poor soul, are about to put on a full Victorian gentleman's outfit. Because today, you're going to find out just how much heat and misery a human body can withstand when wrapped head to toe in 19th century wool. You start with the basics, long cotton drawers and an undershirt. They cling to you instantly. Cotton sounds nice in theory, lightweight, breathable, but not when it's heavy gauge, poorly stitched, and the only thing between your skin and a nightmare. Over that goes your shirt, crisp and stiff, the collar practically a small guillotine. You button it all the way up, because of course you do. No open collars here, that would be scandalous. Next comes the waistcoat. 3 buttons, 4. You can already feel sweat gathering at the base of your spine. Then the trousers, thick, high-waisted, secured with a button fly that might as well be a punishment puzzle. You're layering up like you're preparing for an Arctic expedition, but you're just planning to walk through the market. Then the jacket. Wool, always wool, even in July. Even when the cobblestones are hot enough to fry an eel. Wool was the fabric of respectability. It didn't wrinkle easily, it held its shape, and it announced to the world that you were trying. You slip it on and immediately feel like a baked potato. Accessories, oh yes. A cravat around the neck tied into a complicated knot that would have made Boy Scouts weep. A hat, of course, a bowler or top hat depending on your mood and how committed you are to overheating. And don't forget the gloves. Even in warm weather, gloves were often worn to maintain propriety. Your hands are already sweaty, but etiquette waits for no man. You step outside and the air hits you like a furnace blast. Within 30 seconds, you're sweating through every layer. The hat traps the heat on your scalp. The wool absorbs it and throws it back at your body like a smug little heat sponge. You want to remove something, anything, but you can't. That would be uncivilized. A man in shirt sleeves in public? You might as well be nude. You walk down the street, posture upright, trying to pretend you're not melting inside your own personal sweat sauna. Every movement feels like effort. Your inner thighs are already chafing. Your shirt is sticking to your back like it's clinging for dear life. Here's a fun little Victorian detail. Clothing wasn't just about appearance, it was about class. Working class men might wear fewer layers, but they were judged harshly for it. A proper man was covered, even in sweltering weather. Removing your jacket or rolling up your sleeves was acceptable only in the most private of situations, working in your own garden maybe, if no one was looking. But on the street, no chance. You pass a man hauling a cart who's dared to remove his coat. He gets a look from a nearby constable that could curdle milk. Meanwhile, a banker struts past in full 3-piece wool. Not because it makes sense, but because it's expected. And everyone is sweating. Everyone. Even the stoic ones. Even the ones pretending not to. The smells, as you can imagine, are spectacular. There's the usual London stench, horse dung, coal smoke, spoiled meat. But now it's layered with the musk of hot, wool-clad bodies. Armpits, leather shoes, moist collars, and the unmistakable scent of hair pomade melting under pressure. You catch a whiff of yourself and regret every decision you've made today. Let's pause for a quirky fringe fact. Some men used to sprinkle their undergarments with dried herbs or tuck scented sachets into their waistcoats to try and combat the smell. Others would dab vinegar behind their ears. It didn't help much. It just made them smell like pickled desperation. You duck into a shop to escape the sun, only to find that it's hotter inside. The cramped space is packed with bodies, none of whom have bathed recently. You're shoulder to shoulder with a man whose beard appears to be sweating independently of his face. The woman behind the counter is fanning herself with a newspaper, her blouse visibly damp under the arms. You try to stand still, to not move more than absolutely necessary. Every shift of your weight sends fresh waves of damp heat rolling down your back. There's scholarly debate about whether men truly wore all these layers every single day, especially in hot weather. Some argue that working-class men adapted, wore thinner shirts, skipped waistcoats, or opted for linen when they could afford it. But for middle-class and upper-class gentlemen, expectations were rigid. If you were out in public, particularly in professional or social situations, you dressed. Heat be damned, you leave the shop drenched, your socks are soaked, your waistband is sagging ominously. You consider loosening your cravat, but no, it would invite scandal, or at least a stern look from someone with better posture. You return home and strip off layer after layer, like you're peeling an onion made of regret. Your undershirt is transparent with sweat. Your socks squish slightly as you peel them off. You collapse onto your straw mattress, still half-dressed, and stare at the ceiling, wondering how anyone survived this century without simply melting into their own clothes. And the worst part, there's no relief coming, no air conditioning, no fan, just you, your wool trousers, and the heat that never quite leaves the city. You dab your forehead with a rag and think about how this was considered normal, expected even. You've got a new appreciation for today's breathable fabrics and the blessed, blessed invention of shorts. But more than anything, you've gained deep respect for the men who somehow managed to sweat through 3 layers of wool while still pretending they were completely fine. Tomorrow's adventure. The summer reaches its breaking point, and so does London, because the Thames is about to become an open sewer, Parliament flees, and the entire city is baptised in a smell so bad it earns a name, the Great Stink. You wake to a smell. That's not new. Everything in Victorian London wakes you with some smell or another, but this one's different, sharper. It cuts through your sleep like a hot knife through cheese that's gone just slightly off. You open your eyes and it's still there, not just lingering in the room, but seeping through the walls, the floorboards, your skin. A thick, sour, suffocating stench that makes your teeth itch. You sit up slowly, cautiously, and you immediately realise what day it is. This isn't just another humid summer morning. This is the summer. 1858. You are now smack in the middle of the infamous Great Stink. You'd heard rumours the last few days, whispers about the Thames turning unpleasant, about fish dying in swarms, about bargemen fainting mid-river. But Londoners are tough. They've been living in the equivalent of an open sewer for years. It's never exactly smelled good here. So what's changed? Well, everything. This particular summer has been relentless, hot, dry and stagnant. The kind of heat that makes bread mould in a day and beer go flat before it even reaches your lips. But worse than that, the low tide in the Thames has exposed a secret no one wanted to confront. The river is no longer a river. It's a steaming, gelatinous soup of human waste, rotting animal carcasses, chemical runoff and every other abomination dumped into it since plumbing was a pipe dream. And now, without rain to dilute it or flow to carry it away, all of that filth is just sitting there, cooking, brewing, waiting. You stumble to your window and look out. The city looks the same, more or less, but people are walking faster, heads down, faces twisted. A man on the corner is holding a lavender-scented handkerchief to his nose like it's a lifeline. Someone's burning something in a brazier just to try and cut the odour. It doesn't work. Nothing does. Even Parliament can't ignore it anymore. The official buildings sit right along the riverbank, and the smell has gotten so bad that they've soaked the curtains in chloride of lime. Think bleach, but Victorian. The windows are covered, the drapes are wet, and still the stench seeps in like a cruel reminder that no one, not even the lawmakers, can escape the consequences of years of hygienic denial. And that's the thing, this isn't sudden. It's been building for decades. The Thames has been the city's toilet, trash chute and occasional drinking source for longer than anyone cares to admit. Cholera outbreaks have come and gone, leaving piles of corpses and questions in their wake. But nothing has lit a fire under the city quite like this nose-wilting catastrophe. You decide to see it for yourself, because apparently you've stopped valuing your sinuses. You walk toward the river, each step bringing you closer to what can only be described as a physical smell. Not just scent, presence. You round a corner and there it is, the Thames, brown and thick, bubbling gently in the summer sun. It doesn't flow so much as it slithers. A dead dog floats past. Nearby, a child pokes a stick into a heap of something that was probably once organic. Maybe a tree, maybe not. You gag a little. It's involuntary. Here's a historical gem for you. People have been warning about this for years. Scientists like John Snow, no, not the one from the wall, had already connected cholera to contaminated water. But his theories had been largely dismissed. After all, the air smelled bad. That had to be the cause of disease, right? Miasma theory still ruled the day. Germs? Invisible monsters living in water? Preposterous. But now, faced with a stench that made even the most hardened noses curl, the powers that be couldn't keep ignoring it. Newspapers called for action. Clergy preached about divine punishment. Even Queen Victoria reportedly refused to travel along the river anymore. It took a literal wave of fecal air to force the city to admit, maybe, just maybe, pumping raw sewage into the main waterway wasn't a flawless plan. You sit on a bench near the embankment, fanning yourself weakly with a newspaper article titled, "What Shall Be Done with the Thames?" The writer suggests building a system of underground sewers, something ambitious and revolutionary. And there is a man behind it all, Joseph Basil Jett, civil engineer, sewer evangelist. He's got a plan. Miles and miles of brick-lined tunnels to carry waste away from the city and out to sea. Radical, expensive, and after this summer, unstoppable. And a quirky detail, during the worst days of the Great Stink, people soaked their handkerchiefs in perfume vinegar or carbolic acid just to walk outside. Some even wore masks, not for health reasons, but to survive the sheer assault on the senses. One enterprising vendor even sold scented moustache wax, promising it would defend the gentleman's honour and nostrils alike. Probably didn't work, but it made a good ad. You walk along the embankment and past several others doing the same, their faces pinched in a collective expression of disgusted resignation. No one talks. There's nothing to say. You all understand that this smell, this moment, has changed something fundamental in the city. Hygiene is no longer a matter of personal virtue, it's a matter of public survival. You turn back toward home, eyes watering, stomach twisting, every breath a gamble. You pass a man vomiting quietly into a bush. He waves you off like this is just part of his daily routine now. You don't argue. Back in your lodging house, your landlady is boiling rags in vinegar and scrubbing the windows with something that smells like industrial regret. She nods grimly. "You made it down to the river then," she says. You nod. No further explanation needed. You lie down, still fully dressed, unwilling to move for fear of stirring the smell that now clings to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. And you think this might actually be rock bottom. But rock bottom, it turns out, is still to come. Because tomorrow you get sick, really sick. And the man who's supposed to help you? Well, let's just say Victorian doctors aren't known for their hygiene, or their accuracy, or their hand washing. You've made it this far, bathed in public soup water, sweated through wool in July, sat on a privy with 1,000 ghosts of deposits past. But now your body has had enough. You wake to a pounding head, a gut that seems to be staging a violent rebellion, and the distinct sensation that something is terribly wrong. You're freezing and sweating at the same time. Every joint aches like it's been boiled. Welcome to your first serious Victorian illness. You don't know what it is. Dysentery maybe, typhoid. Could be cholera if fate's really feeling cruel. But it's hitting fast and hard. You curl into yourself on the straw mattress, the blanket scratchy against your skin, your teeth chattering, despite the midsummer heat. Your landlady finds you like this, mumbling nonsense into the pillow. She presses a hand to your forehead and makes a tutting sound. "You need a doctor," she says, which would be comforting if it weren't Victorian England. Because in this time period, calling the doctor isn't necessarily a step toward healing. It's more like flipping a coin. Heads, you get better by accident. Tails, you end up worse off than before. You're about to find out just how terrifying that coin toss can be. She sends a boy to fetch the local physician, who arrives an hour later smelling of pipe smoke and horses. He's wearing a waistcoat with unidentifiable stains and hasn't shaved in what looks like 3 days. He doesn't knock, just strides in, carrying a medical bag made of cracked leather and crushed hope. He doesn't wash his hands. Of course he doesn't. Germ theory is still fighting for its life, and many doctors scoff at the idea of invisible things causing disease. To them, infection comes from bad air, or an imbalance in your humours, or, you guessed it, moral failing. Dirty thoughts, weak character, too much melancholia. You're sweating through your mattress, but apparently this could also be your fault. The doctor sits beside you and pokes at your abdomen with fingers that probably just finished stitching up someone's leg without gloves. "Tender," he says. "Could be a bilious fever. Could be an obstruction. Might be a chill. You've been near the Thames, haven't you?" He nods sagely, as if that explains everything. He asks if you've experienced any spiritual malaise recently. You blink. That's not a metaphor. He's genuinely inquiring whether your soul has been disturbed, because in some circles that counts as a symptom. You whisper something between a cough and a moan. He takes this as consent for treatment. Now, let's talk about what treatment means in this era. If you're lucky, he'll give you laudanum, a pleasant little mix of alcohol and opium that knocks you out and slows your insides. If you're unlucky, he might bleed you, with a knife, or leeches, or both, to rebalance your humours, of course. He rummages through his bag and pulls out a vial. "Bit of calomel," he announces, shaking white powder into a tin spoon. "Mercury chloride clears the bowels." You try to shake your head, but it barely moves. He pries open your mouth and administers it anyway. It tastes like metal and despair. You swallow and wonder how long it takes to die from mercury poisoning. And that's the horrifying reality. Many of the most common treatments in the Victorian medical playbook are either useless or actively harmful. Mercury, arsenic, turpentine, these are all considered legitimate tools. The idea isn't to support the body so much as to shock it back into balance. If you vomit, sweat, or soil yourself uncontrollably, the doctor counts that as progress. You lie still, eyes barely open, and watch as he prepares a mustard plaster for your chest. It's a sticky, stinking paste meant to draw out the illness. It burns as he applies it, leaving your skin red and itchy. He nods with satisfaction. If it blisters, we'll know it's working. For fever, he recommends wrapping your feet in vinegar-soaked cloth. For your cough, he offers a syrup made of sugar, brandy and tar. Best taken before sleep, he says, though you're pretty sure it's also used to waterproof boats. He leaves after an hour, promising to return tomorrow. You lie there, stomach gurgling ominously, lungs burning and a cold sweat pooling in the small of your back. Every breath feels like a decision. The room smells like vinegar, camphor and something else. Maybe your own fear. Here's a grim but fascinating fringe fact. Doctors in the 1800s rarely washed their instruments between patients. Surgical tools were reused, bloody and crusted, from one body to the next. Hospitals were breeding grounds for infection, especially lying-in wards for women in childbirth. One doctor, Ignaz Semmelweis, noticed that women delivered by midwives had lower mortality rates than those delivered by doctors, who often came straight from autopsies. He suggested hand-washing. He was mocked and institutionalised. You think about this as you drift in and out of fever dreams. The doctor who just fed you mercury probably treated someone with open wounds an hour earlier. His hands, those instruments, they've seen everything, touched everything. You shudder. Your landlady checks on you every so often, dabbing your forehead with a cloth soaked in rosewater. She hums softly, an old hymn about suffering and salvation. You can't tell if it's comforting or terrifying. Maybe both. You spend the next day alternating between sleep and agony. Your stomach rejects the calomel in violent bursts. The plaster leaves welts on your chest. The fever breaks for a moment, then returns, stronger. You dream about falling into the Thames, about floating in a river of bile, while doctors in top hats toss leeches at you like carnival prizes. Eventually, you wake in the small hours, drenched, dizzy, but vaguely better. Your head is clearer, your breath comes easier. Somehow, despite the doctor, not because of him, you're surviving. Your body, abused but resilient, is fighting back. The doctor returns and declares you on the mend. He offers more calomel. You decline. He seems offended, but shrugs and pockets the tin. Strong constitution, he mutters. Probably Protestant. Then he leaves. You're left alone in the quiet aftermath of Victorian medicine. Still sick, still weak, but alive. You wrap yourself in a blanket that smells faintly of vinegar, and dreams deferred. Outside, a cart rolls past, its wheels clattering like bones. Inside, you try to sleep and not think about how close you just came to death by well-intentioned incompetence. Tomorrow you'll explore why the city believed smells caused disease in the first place and how one bad theory kept good hygiene away for far too long. You're alive, somehow. Fever broken, limbs still sore, but your brain is mostly functioning again, though it's still marinating in the trauma of being dosed with mercury and slathered in mustard paste. You sit up slowly, every joint cracking in protest, and the world wobbles like a cheap painting nailed to a crooked wall. Your landlady peeks in and smiles, clearly relieved to see you upright and not groaning. She brings you weak tea and a dry biscuit that tastes faintly of dust. You chew it like it's a delicacy. But your near-death experience has left you with questions, big ones, like, why does everyone here think bad smells cause disease? Why did your doctor spend more time sniffing your sweat than washing his hands? And how did an entire society miss the memo on germs? So today, you're diving nose first into the bizarre and surprisingly long-lived world of miasma theory, a belief system so entrenched in Victorian health science that it literally shaped the city, its laws, its plumbing, or lack thereof, and the very fabric of everyday life. Let's set the scene. It's the 19th century. Microscopes exist, sure, but their use is limited mostly to the fringe scientists and daring medics who aren't afraid of what they might find. Germ theory, the idea that invisible organisms can infect and harm you, is still considered fringe science, borderline absurd by most mainstream physicians. Instead, the prevailing wisdom is this. Disease comes from bad air. Not just foul-smelling air, but a kind of toxic vapour known as miasma, which seeps from decaying matter and floats unseen through cities, slums, and scandalous neighbourhoods like a plague-bearing fog. Miasma isn't just a theory, it's the theory. It's been around since ancient Greece and clung to European medicine like mould on a chamber pot. The logic, in Victorian terms, is impeccable. Smells bad, must be unhealthy. People die near foul-smelling places. Obviously the smell killed them. The idea that something invisible, but unscented, could be the true culprit is dismissed as eccentric at best and dangerous at worst. So naturally, public health policies are designed with miasma in mind. Cities build wide boulevards not for traffic, but to air things out. Trees are planted to purify the air. Vinegar is splashed on streets, doorways, even corpses to mask and neutralise foul odours. Hospitals and poorhouses are built on hills or near rivers to catch the breeze, with zero understanding of how those same breezes are often just pushing contaminated air from one place to another. And here's where it gets truly strange. In some cases, miasma theory almost works. People burn incense or dubjit or tar to improve indoor air, and in doing so accidentally fumigate the area. Homes are scrubbed, windows opened, bedding changed, all in the name of keeping the air sweet. While they've got the science completely wrong, the results occasionally land in the right neighbourhood. Sometimes cleaning for the wrong reason still gets you a few health points. You step outside, still weak but curious, and walk slowly through your neighbourhood. It's a clearer day, which in Victorian London means only moderately choking. You spot a group of sanitation workers, well, they call themselves that, sprinkling lime over a pile of spoiled vegetables on the curb. Lime, a caustic powder, is thought to neutralise miasmas. In reality, it mostly just makes everything look ghostly and smell like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. As you pass, one of the men waves a cloth in your direction. "Don't linger, sir," he warns. "There's a nasty stench here. Won't do your lungs any favours." You nod solemnly and keep walking, because everyone here is always dodging smells like they're bullets. You reach a butcher's stall where the offal bucket, full of trimmings, fat and meat that's given up, sits open to the air. The butcher sprinkles ashes over it and places a sprig of mint on the counter. "Keeps the death smell down," he says, not joking. It doesn't. It just adds a layer of minty denial. A fun little fringe fact. Some Victorians believed that carrying a pomander, a small metal ball filled with herbs and flowers, could protect you from disease. You were supposed to sniff it when you passed something particularly vile. Think of it as an early version of Vicks Vapo Rub meets medieval superstition. They were popular accessories for both fashion and survival. Some were engraved, personalised, passed down through generations like heirlooms of anxiety. You reach a churchyard and sit on the edge of a stone wall. Nearby, a group of children plays near a drain that's clearly oozing something biological. No one stops them. Their parents are more concerned about the breeze. One woman holds a lavender-soaked cloth to her daughter's face every time the wind shifts. "Smells like something died," she mutters. "Best keep the bad airs out." You don't have the heart to tell her that the drain did just belch. Scholars still debate why miasma theory held on so tightly for so long. By the mid-1800s, evidence was piling up in favour of germ theory, thanks to figures like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. But public perception is slow to change, especially when it's tangled up with morality. In miasma logic, poor hygiene isn't just dangerous, it's sinful. Filthy streets, disorderly homes, immoral neighbourhoods, all believed to generate more miasma. Disease was tied to vice. The poor got sick because they were dirty, and they were dirty because they were lazy or corrupt. It was pseudoscience dipped in classism. You pass a public water pump, one of many still in use despite whispers about contamination. You remember the story of Dr. John Snow, not the brooding TV guy, but the real one, who traced a cholera outbreak to a specific pump on Broad Street. He removed the handle, and the cases dropped. Proof that the water, not the air, was the culprit. But many dismissed it as coincidence. They kept using other pumps, even those drawing directly from the Thames, because the water looked clean. The air, though? That stank. You walk back slowly, the weight of misinformation pressing harder than your fever did. Your landlady greets you with a smile and a bottle of rosewater. "Spritz the linens," she says proudly. "You'll sleep better." You nod. Maybe you will. Maybe the placebo is half the cure. You lie down on the cot and stare at the ceiling, thinking about all the decisions made in this city. Policy, medicine, construction. Based on a theory that's wrong but smells right. You can almost understand it. The nose is convincing. is the only part of your body that doesn't lie to you outright. And if something makes you gag, it must be evil, right? But tomorrow you'll meet the few people fighting against all that. Reformers, sewer builders, and the slow grim march toward real public health. The miasma theory may linger, but its days are numbered, and some brave souls are about to risk their reputations to clean up what this city has spent centuries piling up. Your fever has faded, but the questions haven't. You now know the city is sick. Not just you, not just the people, but the entire system. It's in the air, in the streets, in the bricks themselves. And while most Londoners are busy sniffing pomanders and dabbing vinegar on their curtains, a small, tired group of people is trying something else entirely. Fixing it. Not covering the smell, not blaming the poor, but actually cleaning things up. Today you're going to follow one of them. A sanitation reformer. A real one. Not a man with a bucket of lime and hope, but someone trying to mop the ocean. Meet Mr. Elijah Hargreaves. He's not famous, not a celebrity doctor or political crusader. He's just a civil clerk working for the Metropolitan Board of Works, a place that sounds deeply boring but is, in fact, trying to keep the entire city from collapsing into a pit of its own waste. You meet him near a pumping station, where he's elbow-deep in blueprints and surrounded by workers laying brick like their lives depend on it. Because they do. Elijah is pale, overworked, and perpetually ink-stained. His collar is wilted, his shoes muddy, and he smells faintly of paper mould and ambition. But when he talks about sewers, his eyes light up like he's describing a symphony. You weren't expecting that. He offers you a pair of rubber overshoes, though they're too small, and invites you to tag along on today's inspection. You're going underground. Now, to clarify, London does have a sewer system, thought of. It's a patchwork of old Roman drains, medieval tunnels, and hastily dug cesspits that snake beneath the city like drunken roots. Most are either clogged, broken, or simply dumping straight into the Thames. The new system, that's what Basil Jett, the engineer you read about, is trying to build. Miles of engineered sewer lines, all designed to carry waste away from people and drinking water. Revolutionary. You follow Elijah down a narrow access tunnel lit by flickering lanterns. The smell hits immediately. Damp brick, mildew, and something sulphurous that doesn't like to be named. The air is thick. The floor is slick. Your boots slide. Elijah doesn't flinch. "Watch the rats," he says, as though they're just another workplace hazard. You hear one squeak in the darkness. It sounds large. Down here you see how monumental the problem really is. The tunnel is coated in grime, streaked with dried sludge and glistening mould. Elijah points to a section of brick wall where water seeps through in a steady trickle. Old cesspit overflow, been bleeding through for years. We're routing it into a main outfall sewer next month, if Parliament approves the funding. That's the problem. The science is mostly figured out. The engineering is happening, but politics, bureaucracy, they move slower than this sludge. Elijah spends half his time begging for resources from people who think a new opera house is more important than a working sewer. They don't smell it like we do, he mutters. They have carriages, private gardens, fragrant handkerchiefs. They can pretend this isn't happening. You emerge from the sewer blinking into daylight and feel, for the first time, like the city is layered in dirt you hadn't even noticed before. Every building, every street corner is just a polished facade over something rotting. You see it now, and Elijah sees it every day. You walk with him through a neighbourhood where the reformers have already done work. The difference is immediate. There are drains here, real ones, covered grates instead of open ditches. The streets don't reek of rot. People still live 10 to a room, still share one privy between 20, but the water flows in the right direction, for once, downhill, away from where people eat and breathe. A local woman waves at Elijah as he passes. She's holding a toddler with bare feet and a runny nose. "You're the one who fixed the water, aren't you?" she calls. He smiles and shrugs. "Trying to," he says. "That's as close to praise as anyone gets in this job. A fun historical fact. In 1848, the government passed the Public Health Act, which was supposed to give towns the power to create boards of health and start cleaning things up. The problem? It was optional. Towns could opt in, many didn't. Too incentive, too controversial. No one wanted to pay taxes for someone else's filth. It wasn't until cholera came back again, and again, that the government started forcing the issue. Elijah takes you to see one of the newly built pumping stations. It's oddly beautiful. Brickwork, arches, even a little decorative iron. Bazalgette believed sanitation could be functional and elegant. The machinery inside is enormous, steam-driven engines built to move waste faster than the city can produce it. For now, London's population is exploding, tenements rise like fungi, and every new body means more sewage to carry, more water to clean, more risk. There's scholarly debate about just how effective these early efforts were. Some historians argue that the reforms saved thousands of lives and laid the foundation for modern public health. Others point out that change came unevenly, that many neighbourhoods remained foul long after the elite areas were cleaned up. But there's no debate about one thing: people like Elijah were doing something no one else had tried. They weren't moralising, they weren't sniffing the air, they were digging, draining, building, solving. You ask Elijah why he does it, why he works in filth for little pay and even less recognition. He shrugs. "I don't have the luxury of pretending this city doesn't stink," he says, "but maybe one day my son won't have to smell it." You walk back home slowly, the image of that tunnel burned into your brain. You've seen what lies beneath London's boots and bonnets. The truth isn't glamorous. It isn't even clean. It's pipes and brick and stubborn people with shovels. Your landlady meets you at the door with a puzzled look. "You smell like a sewer," she says, wrinkling her nose. You nod. "I saw one," you reply. You don't elaborate. You collapse onto your cot, every muscle sore, and wonder how long it will take for the stench to leave your clothes. Probably never. But at least now you understand what it takes to clean a city, not just laws or soap or yelling about moral decay, but people willing to descend into the muck and come back up with a plan. Tomorrow you're staying home, but don't get too comfortable. The walls are thin, the bedding's infested, and your room may actually be trying to kill you. You sleep deeply after your sewer adventure, more from exhaustion than peace, and wake to a strange tickling sensation on your leg. You brush it off, thinking it's just your blanket, but then it moves, definitely moves. You sit up in a cold sweat and yank back the covers. A cockroach scurries across the mattress like it owns the place, and honestly it kind of does. You lock eyes for a moment before it disappears into the shadowy gap between the wall and the bed frame, leaving you with a grim realization. Your home isn't just dirty, it's a biohazard. Welcome to the interior world of the average Victorian dwelling. You've spent so much time outside of wading through the filth of London streets that you might have fooled yourself into thinking the inside of a house would be cleaner, safer, somehow more human. It's not. The walls, the floors, the furniture, all of it is just a slightly better dressed extension of the mess outside. Only this time it's your mess. Or at least the mess you're sharing with 6 other people, a colony of bedbugs, and a rat family named Regret. You swing your legs off the side of the straw mattress, which crunches slightly under your weight. That's not normal. You lift the edge and find a mess of old straw, lint, something that was definitely once alive, and a swarm of tiny black dots, fleas, hundreds, maybe thousands. You drop the corner like it's on fire, which it probably should be. This is your bed. It's not a mattress in the modern sense. It's a palliasse, basically a sack of straw that gets refilled when someone remembers or when the smell becomes a topic of neighbourhood gossip. It doesn't have springs, just lumps. There's no fitted sheet, just a blanket that looks like it's been around since the plague. You shake it out and are immediately enveloped in a fine cloud of dust and dandruff. A few more insects tumble out like they've been evicted. You cough. Welcome to your own tiny ecosystem. You move to the walls, hoping for some visual relief. Bad idea. The wallpaper is peeling in places, discoloured from damp in others. It smells vaguely of rot, and the oil your landlady insists keeps out miasmic influences. There's mould in the corners, black fluffy mould that practically waves when you look at it. Above your wash basin, water stains have bloomed into organic shapes that might qualify as modern art if they weren't potentially fungal. There's a framed photo on the wall of someone who definitely isn't your landlady. It's tilted, water damaged, and possibly watching you. Below it, a crack zigzags down the plaster, where a few bricks are showing through. There's no insulation, just the thin illusion of shelter between you and the London filth storm outside. The floorboards creak ominously. You notice a small hole near the edge where something has clearly been gnawing. The rat. The rat. You never see him fully, just flashes. A tail here, a glimmer of eyes there. He's polite, in that he waits until you're asleep to explore the room, but you can hear him in the walls, a slow, deliberate scritch that keeps pace with your heartbeat. You name him Gregory. He does not return the courtesy. Your room has no running water, no sink, and definitely no toilet. just the wash basin you use to awkwardly sponge yourself clean. The water's gone cloudy since yesterday. You make a mental note to ask your landlady for fresh water. That usually means she'll carry up a bucket tomorrow if she remembers. Let's talk about lighting. There's a single oil lamp in the corner which spits smoke and flickers like it's auditioning for a horror story. At night, it throws strange shadows across the walls, illuminating the uneven surfaces of the room and casting cockroach-shaped silhouettes that move whether you want them to or not. You've tried candles, but the wax is expensive and the heat just makes the bugs more active. You sit at the tiny wooden table near the window. One leg is shorter than the others, so it rocks gently with every movement, like it's seasick. There's a drawer, stuck shut from years of grime and mystery spills. You gave up on opening it days ago. The chair is straight-backed, unforgiving and splintering. The previous tenant carved something into the seat. You can't tell what it says, but it probably wasn't meant as encouragement. A quirky Victorian detail for you. Houses were often papered with arsenic-laced wallpaper. The green dyes used in fashionable patterns, especially the popular Shields green, contained arsenic compounds that could flake off and poison people slowly over time. Scientists eventually noticed the connection between bad air and rooms decorated like botanical murder scenes. Of course, by then half the city had already licked it, touched it, or absorbed it through their skin. Your wallpaper is beige. That's not comforting. Arsenic came in beige too. There's a long-standing scholarly debate over just how unlivable these homes really were. Some historians argue that they were simply cramped and shabby, cheap but survivable. Others dig into census records, health data and photographs that reveal the extent of the squalor. Open drains running beside kitchens as single rooms shared by 8 people, houses built on top of decomposing animal yards. The reality likely depends on where you were, who you were, and how much rent you could afford to beg, borrow, or lie about. You take a piece of bread from your tin on the shelf and notice it's gone fuzzy. Mould, again. You scrape it off and eat it anyway. You have to. Spoilage is part of the game here. No refrigerators, no cling film, just wishful thinking and an iron stomach. You sip water from the tin cup beside your bed and hope it doesn't taste too metallic today. It does. You drink it anyway. Then from above, thump. The ceiling creaks. You hear coughing. A child wailing, a pot slamming down. The walls are paper thin and seem to carry noise better than warmth. You know your upstairs neighbour by name, Gertrude, by cough, wet and rhythmic, and by tragedy, lost a husband to typhus last spring. You've never spoken more than 5 words to her, but you know her entire sleep schedule. Back downstairs, your landlady is arguing with someone about the coal bill. You hear the word cold repeated several times, followed by what might be a reference to Satan's toe. You don't ask, you never ask. This house is a collection of lives stacked on top of each other, held together by mould, hope, and dried stew. You lie back on your mattress, curl into a space free of bugs for now, and listen. The city breathes around you, scratches, muffled weeping, a rat skittering. The floor groans, the window hisses in the wind, and your lungs struggle against the damp air. But this is home. Tomorrow you'll go outside again, to the streets, to the children. You'll meet the urchins who live in even worse conditions than this, and somehow they're thriving, or at least surviving with a kind of dirty resilience you haven't yet learned. You wake to the sound of metal clinking on stone and a high-pitched giggle that sounds, frankly, feral. Pulling yourself from the bug-infested straw mattress, you shuffle to the grimy window and peel back the curtain. There they are, a small pack of street children darting between piles of horse dung and broken crates like they're playing a game that only makes sense to them. One of them's barefoot. Actually, most of them are. And one is proudly wearing what looks like an adult's boot on the wrong foot. No laces, no socks, just a small child in a leather clown shoe, hopping around like he owns the world. You stare in disbelief. He does not care. This is your introduction to the Victorian street urchin. You've read about them, those half-mythical creatures that populate Dickens novels and workhouse nightmares, but seeing them in motion is something else entirely. They move like smoke, filthy, fast, loud smoke. You throw on your boots and coat, still slightly damp from yesterday's sewer tour, and step outside to follow them. You've got questions, like how are they still alive? The city is already in motion. Milk carts, newspaper boys, soot-covered chimney sweeps climbing roofs that creak like they're haunted. But the kids are everywhere. They slink between vendors, scramble under wagons, and yell things that sound like they might be threats or invitations to a secret crime ring. It's unclear. You spot the ringleader, a girl maybe 8 years old, hair matted into what might qualify as dreadlocks if you're being generous. She's got a face like she's seen too much and cares too little. In one hand, a stick. In the other, a string tied to a rat. Not dead, not really alive either. You can't tell if it's a pet or a prisoner. She catches you watching and squints. "Oi!" she calls. You look like you ain't at nothing decent in days. You want to argue, but she's not wrong. You slowly approach, careful not to step in anything squishy. "What's your name?" you ask. "Depends," she says. "You buying or reporting?" You tell her you're just curious. She smirks like that's the worst answer. She introduces herself as Nellie Two Socks, which she claims is an ironic nickname since she owns exactly one sock. You spend the next hour trailing her and her crew, 3 boys and a girl with a chipped tooth and the energy of a raccoon on tea leaves. They show you their world. The secret passage between 2 chimney stacks, the dry part of the alley where it's safe to sleep if you tuck yourself under the butcher's awning, the church that hands out bread if you pretend to pray long enough. Here's the thing, these kids are barely clothed. Their faces are smudged with soot, their hair permanently textured by city grime, and their hands always sticky with something. But they're vibrant. Somehow they're not just alive, they're thriving in this chaos. They've figured out the gaps in the system and wedged themselves in like gum under a school desk. You ask when they last had a bath. They stare at you blankly, like you've asked them to define quantum physics. "We got the Thames," one boy shrugs, "or the rain if it's warm." Washing to them isn't a chore, it's a luxury, and an occasional accident. Their lives revolve around survival, not soap. Hunger is more urgent than hygiene, shelter more precious than shampoo. The rat on the string, his name is Little Doctor, hasn't seen a bath either. A fringe fact, by the mid-19th century, London had tens of thousands of homeless children. Some were orphans, others were simply abandoned. Families with too many mouths to feed might push the oldest onto the street with a be useful or be gone sort of ultimatum. The lucky ones found gangs or apprenticeships. The unlucky ones found workhouses, prisons or shallow graves. There were charitable organisations, yes, ragged schools, shelters, but they were few and underfunded, and most kids learned fast that trusting adults didn't usually end well. You follow Nellie to her favourite hiding place, a crumbling stairwell that leads beneath a condemned building. She lights a stub of candles she stole from a church and shows you her treasures. A piece of blue glass, a chicken bone that's been licked clean. A coin so worn it's probably Roman. She says she'll use it to buy a bun. You doubt any shopkeeper will accept it, but you admire her optimism. "Sometimes the nuns let us wash up," she says suddenly, almost embarrassed. "They got basins, cold water, but they make you listen to prayers first, and they check your ears." You raise your eyebrows. "For devils," she explains flatly. You ask if she's scared of getting sick, and she shrugs. "We all got coughs. Only the green kind means you're done for." They don't fear germs because germs aren't real to them, but they know symptoms. They've made their own science, coughs, rashes, fevers. They watch each other for signs. If someone starts acting strange, they avoid them. If someone starts smelling too sweet, yes, sweet, not rotten, they call them sugar-blooded and say they're near death. There's some debate among historians about just how self-sufficient street children were. Some say they formed tight-knit communities and survived through mutual aid. Others argue that violence, exploitation and sheer chance played bigger roles. But walking with Nellie and her crew, you see a little of both. They share bread but fight over boots. They watch each other's backs but will steal without blinking. Morality here is flexible. Cleanliness is optional. Survival is the only rule. At dusk, they vanish. Disappear into cracks you didn't even notice before. One moment they're there, laughing, pushing, bartering with a fishmonger. The next, they're gone. You're left standing in an alley that smells like stale beer and wet meat, blinking into the shadows, unsure if you imagined them. You walk back home, head buzzing, heart heavy. Inside your filthy room, you suddenly feel lucky. You have a roof, a bucket of water, a mattress, even if it is full of mites. You collapse onto it, listening to the sew, the scratching in the walls, and the echo of Nellie's laugh in your ears. Tomorrow you'll try to escape the city, just for a moment. You'll head to the countryside to breathe something other than soot and slop, but don't hold your breath. The country has its own rotten secrets, and not even fresh air can keep the past from oozing through the soil. You leave the city at first light, boots scuffed, coat collar turned up against the wind, and with a fresh determination to smell anything other than coal smoke and human stew. The plan is simple. Head for the countryside. Breathe. Clear your lungs. Let nature do its thing. And maybe, just maybe, find out if hygiene improves when you put a few miles between yourself and the metropolis that never met a sewer it didn't ignore. You hop a wagon heading out of town squeezed between a crate of cabbages and a woman transporting ducks in a cage so small it's giving you second-hand anxiety. The road is rutted and loud. The wheels clatter over loose stones. The air, though, is different. Lighter. Fresher. It actually moves. You can smell damp grass, wood smoke, something floral, and faintly cowish. It's a major upgrade from fermented fish on fire, which is what London mostly smells like. The houses thin out. Brick gives way to thatch. Chimneys shrink. By mid-morning, you're standing in what someone might optimistically call open country. There's a meadow, a crumbling stone fence, and a cluster of cottages that look like they were built by squirrels with a dream and some leftover mud. It's charming, in a rustic, probably haunted sort of way. You step off the road and immediately put your foot in a cowpat. Perfect. That's the first lesson. The countryside isn't clean. It's just dirty in a different font. There are fewer people, sure, but more animals. A lot more animals, and their waste isn't neatly confined to alleyways or swept into gutters. It's everywhere. Fields, roads, backyards, shoes. If there's a surface, something has probably pooped on it. You approach a small farmstead and ask politely if you can observe for the day. The farmer, a leathery-faced man with the shoulders of someone who's been lifting turnips since birth, shrugs and says you can help slop the pigs if you don't mind the smell. You don't say it aloud, but after London, there's no stench that could surprise you. You're wrong. Pigsties are next level. The mud is not just mud. It's a bubbling, snorting stew of excrement, old food, and what might have been a boot. The pigs are content. You are not. You hold your breath, shovel some of it into a trough, and try not to think about your last bath. You head toward Buckingham Palace, weaving through carriages and beggars, newsboys and powdered aristocrats. The area's different from the rest of the city. Wider streets, less visible muck. Guards in clean uniforms and polished boots stand like furniture. The air smells a little less like human soup, but don't get your hopes up. That's perfume, not sanitation. The palace looms, its facade impressive and white, like a fancy wedding cake with questionable ingredients inside. It's easy to assume that once you pass through those gates, all the filth and suffering of Victorian life disappears. But guess what? Even royalty has to sweat. Let's start with Queen Victoria herself. By all accounts, she was modest, disciplined, and deeply committed to the rituals of cleanliness, by her standards, which were still Victorian standards. She favoured daily sponge baths, not full immersion. A washcloth, a bowl of lukewarm water, a bit of soap if things were feeling ambitious. Full baths were rare and reserved for special occasions. Even then, the water was tepid, the tub was portable, and privacy was minimal. Servants waited just outside or inside ready with towels, lavender water, or an awkward cough when it was time to dry off. Her clothes? Elaborate, yes. Beautiful, certainly, but breathable, not in the slightest. Layers of petticoats, corsets, underskirts, overskirts, bodices, collars, and sleeves so stiff you could balance a tea tray on them. And in all that, she still had to attend public events, ceremonies, church, and endless photo ops. Smiling, sort of, while stewing like a festive ham. Here's the real kicker. All that fashion was worn in an era when deodorant did not exist. The royal armpits, like yours, relied on lemons, talc, or nothing at all. Imagine sitting on a throne with hundreds of courtiers packed into a room, everyone sweating quietly through velvet and lace. That's not a court, it's a high society sauna. There's a fringe fact you'll love. Queen Victoria was obsessed with hygiene emotionally, if not always effectively. She insisted that royal children be raised with strict cleanliness routines, yet believed that touching the face too often could invite madness. She hated bad smells and ordered constant ventilation, sometimes to the point where her servants froze in their boots. But did the palace have proper plumbing during her early reign? No. Chamber pots and commodes were still the norm, even in Buckingham Palace. You circle the building and notice the servants' quarters in the back. This is where things get interesting. For all the pomp of the front rooms, the back corridors were bustling, grimy and unglamorous. Dozens of servants lived, ate and bathed here, if they were lucky. Most slept in cramped, shared rooms, sometimes beneath staircases. Their access to bathing facilities? Limited. Their uniforms, cleaned irregularly, often brushed and refolded rather than fully washed. Why? Laundry took time, space and resources, even in a palace. You meet a footman named Ellis. Tall, tidy, bags under his eyes, deep enough to be postcodes. He walks you through his day. Wake at 5, polish silver, serve breakfast, clean soot off mantelpieces, stand around looking invisible until someone rings a bell. He changes shirts once a day, sometimes just a collar if laundry's backed up. Full bath, maybe once a week if there's time. He wipes down with a cloth between shifts and sprinkles his underarms with starch and rosewater. His smile is strained. Ellis tells you that the royal water closets, those glorious early flushing toilets, are not as widespread as people think. They exist, yes, but only in a few areas. And they're temperamental. Pipes freeze, smells linger, and servants still haul buckets of water to get the thing moving. Better off with the commode, he mutters. At least it's honest. As you glance around the marble halls and gold trim, everything looks pristine, but look closer. The corners still collect dust. The curtains soak up the city's smoke. The air carries hints of whatever's been cooking for lunch. Usually meat, always boiled. There's no getting away from it. Victorian hygiene isn't about being clean. It's about being presentable. The illusion of freshness, not the fact of it. You ask Ellis if he's ever seen the Queen herself. Once, he says. She passed through the hall, smelled like violets and vinegar. Then he winks. That's how you know it's real. Now let's dig into some scholarly debate. Historians still argue how much bathing actually happened among the upper classes. Diaries mention the bath as a regular event, but that could mean anything from a quick foot soak to a full immersion. Some scholars say aristocratic homes had well-appointed bathing rooms. Others say those were more for show than regular use. After all, what good is a marble tub if it takes 3 hours to fill and 4 servants to drain? A lot depended on the water supply. Some palaces had cisterns or wells, but pressure was unreliable. Heated water came from stoves or boilers, and servants carried it, bucket after bucket, upstairs to fill the tubs. So yes, bathing was possible. Convenient, not even close. You stand near the back gates as the sun begins to set, watching a cluster of royal staff rush past carrying linens and silver trays. Behind them, a coal cart empties its load into a chute. The smell of burning starts to drift through the air. Coal, meat, starch and something vaguely herbal. The Queen is likely finishing dinner. Somewhere above, in a gilded room, she may be dabbing her temples with rosewater and preparing for another public appearance. You walk away from the palace, amused and a little sad. Even at the very top, people are still trying to out-perfume their biology. The higher you go, the thicker the powder gets. But under the lace and lavender, everyone's just human. Damp, itchy, uncomfortable human. Tomorrow you'll get personal again. No royals, no marble tubs, just you and your armpits, facing the grim reality of Victorian deodorant. Or, more accurately, the desperate lack of it. You wake up sweating. Not the nice kind of sweat, the kind that makes you feel alive after a jog or slightly dewy in a romantic novel. No, this is full-bodied, shirt-dampening, scalp-clammy, Victorian-style sweat. Your armpits are 2 small swamps. Your back feels like someone poured broth down your spine, and there's a faint but unmistakable tang of self-loathing in the air. This is it. The moment you realise that the one thing Victorians couldn't fight, no matter how many flowers they stuffed in their sleeves, was body odour. Let's talk about deodorant. Or rather, the utter lack of it. In Victorian England, the word deodorant didn't really exist the way we know it now. There were no crystal sticks, no scented gels, no sprays promising 48-hour protection while you ride a horse through a waterfall. What people had instead were powders, perfumes, and an almost religious belief in self-control. If you stank, it wasn't just unpleasant. It was seen as weak, vulgar, possibly immoral, and if you were particularly unlucky, people might assume it meant you were French. You sit at your tiny table dabbing your armpits with a rag soaked in rosewater. That's the go-to solution around here. Scented water, applied generously with a sponge, rag, or if you're feeling decadent, a perfumed glove. It's less about stopping sweat and more about replacing the smell of rot with the smell of a flower that's trying. You sniff your sleeve, the rosewater has already surrendered. Victorians called it perspiration because sweat was too vulgar. Everyone did it, but no one talked about it, especially not women. Women were expected to glow, not sweat. Glow from modest exertion, glow from decorum, not from hauling buckets up 3 flights of stairs or wrestling corsets like they're fighting for their lives. But glow or not, everyone leaked. The human body isn't interested in Victorian manners. You step out for fresh air and immediately regret it. It's summer again, and the streets are humming with heat. The air is thick with coal dust and fish guts, and already your shirt is clinging to you in new innovative ways. You pass a man selling lavender bunches from a cart. He shouts, "For the nose and the underarms, better than sin and cheaper than shame." You buy one, not because you think it'll help, but because the cart smells like hope. A quirky fringe fact for you. Some Victorians carried small bags of crushed herbs in their pockets or under their arms, like DIY potpourri satchels. Some even stitched little pouches of dried flowers into their clothing. Men sometimes wore flower-filled boutonnieres for odour control, not just fashion. Women dusted themselves with starch, talc, or even powdered alum, an astringent mineral that tightened pores and theoretically slowed sweating. In reality, it probably just irritated their skin and made them sneeze. Back at home, you attempt a full Victorian wash-up. No tub, of course, just a seidin, a cloth, and a prayer. You heat some water over the stove, enough to make the cloth warm but not luxurious, and scrub. Armpits first, then feet, then, you know the rest. The goal isn't to get clean. The goal is to smell like someone who tried, which in this society counts for the more than actual hygiene. You change your shirt, well, you flip it inside out. That's about as good as it gets unless it's laundry day, which is once a week if your landlady's in a good mood. She's not, so the shirt gets a quick sprinkle of vinegar and a dusting of lavender powder, which makes it smell like pickled flowers. Better than before, probably. You head to a small perfumery in the East End run by a man named Mr. Talbot. He's slick-haired, soft-spoken, and speaks of sweat as if it's a crime against God. He introduces you to his latest creation, Eau de Civet, which features actual glandular extract from a small cat-like animal. Exotic, earthy, undeniably potent, he says, wafting the scent under your nose. It smells like damp socks dipped in whiskey. You buy a sample, because what's self-respect when you could have exotic gland juice on your pulse points? Mr. Talbot explains that the secret to avoiding body odour is layering. Not clothing, fragrance, a base scent, followed by a powder, then maybe a flower behind the ear. For men, a perfumed moustache is common. For women, perfume is dabbed on gloves, fans, or inside lockets. Why? Because putting it directly on skin might make you look eager, and that, in this era, is worse than smelling like a dying badger. You ask about antiperspirants, he scoffs. Stopping the body's natural excretions? Dangerous. That's how madness begins. This was a real belief. Sweat was the body's way of releasing toxins and emotion. Blocking it could cause hysteria, melancholy, or in the case of one rumour, death by internal suffocation. Deodorants didn't really become popular until the early 20th century, when science and capitalism teamed up to ruin natural musk forever. You leave the shop reeking of lavender, civet, and desperation. It's hard to say if you smell better. You definitely smell louder. A man on the tram shifts slightly away from you. A woman glares. You cough into your gloved hand and try to pretend everything's fine. Scholars debate how obsessed Victorians truly were with body odour. Some argue that the upper classes were fixated on scent as a marker of status. Poor people smelled like work, so rich people had to smell like gardens and moral superiority. Others point out that the average person just didn't have access to the kind of water, soap or leisure required for regular deodorising, so they simply adapted to the stink. Nose blindness became survival. You walk past a group of boys playing in the street, shirtless, covered in grime, laughing without care. You envy them. Their sweat is honest. Your sweat is layered under starch and shame. Back at your lodging, you collapse onto your mattress. Your lavender powder has mixed with your natural funk and turned into something new and unnameable. Your shirt is damp again. Your hair is limp. And despite everything, despite your carefully powdered underarms and expensive civet oil, you still smell human. But that's the secret, isn't it? The Victorians were obsessed with control. Over their bodies, their urges, their smells. But the body always won. The armpits always had the last word. Tomorrow you'll take a detour into the world of women's hygiene. Corsets, petticoats, unwashed petticoats, and the dark, unspoken truth of Victorian menstruation. Spoiler, it's not polite, but it's real. You wake the next morning tangled in a wool blanket and one very persistent sweat pattern, thinking, how bad could women have had it? You've seen what the men endure: grimy collars, foot rot, an unspoken truce with deodorant failure. But Victorian women, with their perfume and parasols and gloves, seem to float just slightly above the muck, or so you thought. Today you're learning the hard truth. Their version of hygiene wasn't easier. It was just buried under layers of fabric, silence and shame. You begin by visiting your friend Ellie, a dressmaker's apprentice who lives above a bakery and always smells faintly of yeast and scorched cotton. She's halfway through ironing a crinoline when you arrive, an enormous bell-shaped cage made of thin steel that looks like a rib cage for a whale who's given up on life. She gestures at the tangled structure and says, "Try wearing this during a heatwave. It's like living inside your own birdcage, but with more chafing." You sit down as she explains the daily ritual of Victorian womanhood, and it's a lot. First, there's the chemise, a thin shift of linen or cotton that serves as a base layer. It absorbs sweat and, in theory, protects outer garments from direct contact with the body. Then come the drawers, long and split down the middle to allow for bathroom access, since removing all layers would take a team of oxen and a 3-day weekend. Then petticoats, multiple, starch-heavy, itch-friendly. Add to that corsets, bustles, underskirts, and finally the gown itself. All this for a walk to the grocer's. Do you ask how often these clothes are washed? Ellie snorts. The chemise and drawers, yes, weekly if you're lucky. But the dresses, the corsets, forget it. Too delicate, too representative, and often too layered with embellishments to survive a wash. Instead, women relied on underlayers to take the hit. Sweat was wicked into linen, and if things got particularly swampy, you just aired the dress out and prayed. Some even rubbed alum or powdered starch on their bodies to reduce moisture. It mostly just caused rashes and clumps. Then there's the issue of the corset itself, a device you now realise is less about shaping the body and more about trapping every drop of sweat against it. Ellie lifts hers to show the canvas lining. It's stiff, stained, and smelled faintly of must and despair. She tells you it hasn't been cleaned in months because there's no way to do it without ruining the bones, made of whale baleen by the way, and warping the shape. So she powders it like a corpse. Now let's dive into the unspoken menstruation. Because if you think modern society struggles to talk about periods, Victorian England practically had a stroke every time a woman bled. It was referred to as the monthly inconvenience, the time of the moon, or just vaguely that. Entire advertisements danced around it like it was Voldemort. Ellie lowers her voice as she describes the options available to women. Primarily reusable cloth pads, homemade, folded and pinned into drawers. Not particularly absorbent, definitely not discreet, and often washed in secret at night so the neighbours wouldn't gossip. If you were wealthy, you might afford a sanitary belt, a charming little contraption of elastic and clasps that held a pad in place like a cross between a chastity belt and a laundry line. The real horror. Many doctors believed that menstruation made women temporarily unclean, mentally unstable, or even dangerous. There were restrictions on what women could eat, read, or even think during their cycles. Medical textbooks warned against women studying or exerting themselves while menstruating, lest it drain blood from their brains and cause hysteria. Yes, actual hysteria. The Victorian catch-all diagnosis for woman doing anything inconvenient. A fringe fact for your troubles. Some women use sponges as makeshift tampons. Real sea sponges, trimmed and inserted with no applicator, no string, and no safety net. You'd take it out, rinse it, and reuse it. Sanitary? No. Effective? Debatable. But it worked better than rolling up your last good handkerchief and praying to Queen Victoria. There's scholarly debate about how prevalent these practices were. Some argue that Victorian women simply bled into their layers, chemises, drawers, and petticoats, and changed them frequently. Others suggest that the silence around menstruation has left massive gaps in historical records, and much of what we assume is guesswork. Diaries rarely mention it, medical guides dismiss it, and advertisements from the time sell ladies' linens in the most euphemistic floral language imaginable. Ellie shrugs when you ask how she handles it. You manage, she says. You learn what to sit on, you learn when to stay home, and you pray your corset doesn't press you so tight you start leaking sideways. You sit there for a moment, genuinely unsure what to say. You'd imagined the corsets and petticoats as aesthetic misery. You hadn't realised how deeply physical it was, How much of a woman's body was wrapped, masked and reshaped, not for comfort, but for control. The idea wasn't to be clean, it was to be contained, to hide anything unsightly, smelly or emotional behind 10 layers of tailored silence. Later, you walk through a dress shop and catch a group of mannequins lined up in the window, all draped in lace and satin. From the street, they look ethereal, like porcelain angels. But now you see them differently. You imagine the sweat trickling down a spine in August, the friction burns, the itch of unwashed lace against an unpowdered thigh, the constant panic of sneezing while pinned into 40 pounds of fabric and menstrual linen. You head home feeling heavy, not with pity exactly, but with understanding. Victorian women weren't just performing femininity, they were surviving it. They were sweating into their corsets, bleeding into silence and scrubbing stains out of their dignity with cold water and rose soap. Back in your room, you sit by the window and watch the women passing on the street, so composed, so upright, gloved hands, high collars, parasols turning to follow the sun. And now you know what's happening under all that, what's pressing against their ribs, soaking into their chemises, silently endured. Tomorrow you'll return to the world of medicine, but this time through the lens of birth. Midwives, miscarriage superstitions, and Victorian childbirth so risky it should come with a legal waiver. Because if you think hygiene was bad in the streets, wait until you see it in the delivery room. You've learned by now that Victorian hygiene is mostly a game of appearances. Everyone's just politely fermenting beneath layers of wool and moral superiority. But nothing will prepare you for what happens when a Victorian woman has a baby. Today you're pulling back the lace curtain on childbirth, and spoiler alert, it's not beautiful, it's not clean, and if you're squeamish, you might want to skip dinner. Because once you step into a 19th century birthing room, you'll realise that modern maternity wards are basically 5-star spas in comparison. Your day begins with a knock at the door. It's Ellie again, looking pale but determined, asking if you'll accompany her to her cousin's house. She's about to deliver, she says, gripping the edge of your doorframe. And the midwife's late. Again. You nod, grab your coat and prepare yourself to witness something intimate, primal, and deeply unsanitary. The cousin Mary lives in a small tenement room with one window, 2 chairs and a mattress that has definitely seen better decades. She's on the bed, hair stuck to her face, groaning through clenched teeth. The air is hot and thick, heavy with sweat, iron and something far too biological to name. Her husband is pacing in the hallway, not allowed in the room. That's women's business. His job is to worry, maybe boil water, and, if necessary, fetch the doctor who will show up just in time to take credit for everything. Mary is in her 6th hour of labour when the midwife finally arrives. She's older, built like a bag of potatoes in a shawl with a grim expression and hands like tree bark. She carries a basket of tools that look more appropriate for shoe repair than healthcare. There's a wooden stethoscope, a pair of scissors, some linen cloths, and a large bottle of gin. Most of it is for her. Some is for Mary. None of it is sterile. That's your first clue that this process isn't going to be hygienic. There's no hand washing, no gloves. The midwife wipes her hands on her apron, an apron that has clearly seen previous births, and immediately begins probing. You wince. Mary screams. The mattress soaks. Let's pause for a fun fringe fact. In Victorian England, many believed that childbirth should be done in near silence. Crying too much was seen as undignified. Some even believed that loud labour pains were a sign of spiritual weakness. So women tried to stifle their screams, biting cloth or gripping rosary beads. Mary does neither. She howls. You want to applaud her, but now's not the time. The midwife mutters about the baby being stubborn. She encourages Mary to push while shoving on her belly like she's kneading dough. There are no antiseptics, no clean sheets, just layers of cloth soaked in fluids that will probably be rinsed, dried, and reused. This is not uncommon. Poor families often use the same linen rags for multiple births. Bleaching them was a luxury. Boiling them was wishful thinking. The baby arrives in the 8th hour, purple and slippery. It's not breathing. The midwife slaps its back, shakes it a little, then blows into its mouth with a practiced sigh. The baby sputters, wails, and instantly fills the room with a different kind of chaos. Mary collapses backward, sobbing with relief. No one celebrates. They're waiting to see if the baby keeps crying. Because infant mortality is high, terrifyingly high, and silence is never good news. Now, the afterbirth. No one talks about it, but it's very much happening. The midwife coaxes it out, wraps it in cloth and sets it in a basin like leftovers. Then she starts stitching. Mary's torn, of course, that's normal. But there's no anaesthesia. Just a swig of gin and some very tight gripping of the bedsheet. You step outside for air and nearly retch. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about how safe childbirth was in the Victorian era. Some historians argue that women giving birth at home with midwives often fared better than those in hospitals. Why? Because hospitals were cesspools of infection. Doctors moved from autopsies to delivery rooms without washing their hands. Semmelweis, the Hungarian doctor who first suggested hand-washing, was mocked so relentlessly that he died in an asylum. So yes, midwives lacked formal training, but at least they didn't bring cadaver bacteria into the nursery. But midwives weren't perfect either. Many followed folk traditions that ranged from harmless to horrifying. Some used goose grease to ease the passage, others inserted herbs, believed to ward off evil spirits, and still others trusted deeply in prayer, assuming that a difficult labour meant God was punishing the woman for something, vanity, promiscuity, not finishing her soup. You name it. And then there were the social rules. A woman couldn't labour with the window open, it might invite in chills, which were thought to cause death. She couldn't get up too soon after birth, or her womb might literally fall out. She also couldn't laugh, eat certain foods, or look at a dog because there were superstitions about the baby being born with animal traits. Yes, really. Mary survives the birth. The baby survives the night. This is considered a victory. She'll spend the next week in bed, barely moving, sipping broth and trying not to hemorrhage. She'll be checked once a day by the midwife, who now smells like gin, sweat, and a faint suggestion of regret. You leave the tenement shaken. It wasn't just the blood or the sounds or the lack of gloves. It was the vulnerability of it all. The way birth is supposed to bring life, and yet feels like a coin toss with death. Outside, you pass a church with a line of women waiting to baptise their newborns. Some are days old, some hours. Not because the families are particularly devout, but because they know death could come quickly, and it's better to get a soul squared away just in case. You return to your room feeling small. The city hums around you. Life moves on. Somewhere else, another woman is screaming into her mattress while a midwife looks bored and a man paces outside, clueless. You pour yourself a cup of water, sit on the floor and stare at your hands. They feel too clean, too useless. Tomorrow you'll shift focus again, because there's still one corner of Victorian hygiene you haven't explored: the grave, bodies, burials, and the sweet, sick stink of a city that can't stop dying, and worse, can't figure out where to put the dead. You wake up with a weight on your chest, not a metaphor this time, but the thick grey air pressing through your window like a damp towel full of regret. London smells different today. It's not sewage or sweat or soot, though those are all still part of the bouquet. No, this has a sharper edge, a sweetness that doesn't belong. It smells like decay with a hint of perfume. It smells like a funeral parlour in denial. And that's because it's Death Day, friend. Today you're visiting the underworld of Victorian hygiene, how people died, what happened next, and why even the dead weren't safe from this city's grime. You start your journey at the edge of a cemetery wall, bricks stained with rain and time. On the other side you hear a gravedigger whistling, off-key and cheerful in the way only someone knee-deep in other people's endings can be. You climb through the gate and take in the scene. It's crowded. Not just with tombstones, but with bodies. And not in the poetic "so many lives" sense, literally. There are too many corpses and not enough holes. You see, in the early 19th century, London's population exploded, but its graveyards didn't. Space was scarce, and rather than solve the issue with logic or sanitation, many churches just started stacking. Coffins upon coffins, sometimes 3 deep, sometimes 6. If the graveyard ran out of room, they'd crack open old plots and wedge a new one in. The soil became spongy with decomposition. Gas pockets formed, graves shifted. You think that's dramatic. There are reports of coffins bursting from the pressure. A real-life horror movie brought to you by poor planning and deeply British denial. You follow the gravedigger, a wiry man named Reggie with a shovel that looks more like a battle-worn weapon. He's digging a fresh plot, though the smell suggests it's anything but. He gestures to a pile of bones near the corner. Don't mind those. he says. Old tenants. We move 'em over if we need the space. Sometimes they're still dressed. You try not to gag. He shrugs. It's just part of the work. There's a body waiting nearby, wrapped in a shroud. No fancy coffin here, too expensive. For the poor burial meant a pine box if you were lucky. A shared grave if you weren't. Some didn't get buried at all. Instead, their remains were left in dead houses, temporary storage shacks attached to hospitals or workhouses, where they'd wait for either a charity plot or a curious surgeon with a loose interpretation of consent. Now, for a truly grim fringe fact, body snatching was so common that some graves were fitted with iron cages called mort safes to keep thieves out. And they weren't stealing valuables, they were stealing bodies. Medical schools needed cadavers for teaching, but the law only allowed them to dissect executed criminals. Supply didn't meet demand, so enterprising individuals, known as resurrection men, made their living digging up the recently dead and selling them to anatomy classes. Freshness mattered. There was a price list. You walk with Reggie to the older part of the cemetery. Here the stones are so worn you can barely read the names. Many plots are unmarked, just mounds. He kicks at one and mutters, "These were plague dead, they say, but no one really knows." There are stories of mass graves from cholera outbreaks, yellow fever, even the occasional typhus wave. No headstones, no ceremony. Just bodies dropped into holes and covered before the stench got out of hand. But the stench did get out of hand. So badly, in fact, that by the 1840s and 50s, the miasma from overcrowded cemeteries was blamed for disease. People living near graveyards started falling ill, not necessarily because of the corpses, but because the drainage systems were so bad that fluids from decomposing bodies seeped into the groundwater. Imagine brushing your teeth with tea made from corpses. That was reality for parts of London. This led to the Burial Acts. New laws passed in a state of mild panic. By mid-century, inner-city burials were banned in many places, and new cemeteries were built on the outskirts. The most famous was Highgate Cemetery, a sprawling Gothic marvel full of twisting paths, marble angels and trees that seem to whisper. You make your way there, and it feels like another world. Quiet, eerie, almost beautiful. You stand before a grand tomb, the kind with Latin inscriptions and stone urns. The Victorians were big on death as performance. Mourning was a whole industry. Widows wore black for 2 years. Mirrors were covered. Clocks were stopped. Hair was cut and saved, sometimes woven into jewellery. There were catalogues for mourning clothes, rules for grief. Death wasn't just a moment, it was a lifestyle. But all that pomp didn't mean the dead were treated well. Even in fancy cemeteries, mistakes happened. Misidentified bodies, graves dug in the wrong place. In one infamous case, a gravedigger collapsed into a plot during a funeral because the soil had liquefied. Death wasn't clean, it wasn't sacred, it was messy, bureaucratic, and still subject to all the usual Victorian failures. You ask Reggie if he's ever buried someone twice. He laughs. Not officially. But I've seen a face twice in a week, sure. You nod slowly and decide you've had enough graveyard for the day. Walking home, you pass a mourning goods shop. Black veils in the window, tear-shaped lockets on a velvet tray. Inside, a woman is sobbing softly while the shopkeeper measures her wrist for a bracelet made from braided hair. You keep walking. Scholars still argue over how deeply the Victorians feared death. Some claim the rituals were about control, ways to tame the chaos. Others say it was more spiritual, a culture obsessed with the afterlife and proper passage. Either way, hygiene wasn't a top concern. They wanted beauty, dignity, a good turnout. Whether the water table was slowly turning into corpse soup, that was someone else's problem. You reach your lodging as the sky turns dark. The scent still clings to you. Earth, damp linen, something sweeter and much worse. You sit on your cot, shoes muddy, stomach turning, and realise that the ultimate hygiene problem isn't how to clean the living. It's how to respectfully contain the dead in a city that keeps growing and dying at the same time. Tomorrow you're wrapping things up. The smells, the bugs, the blood, the superstitions. It all comes together for one final stroll through the weird, wild landscape of Victorian hygiene. You've made it this far. One more night. Try not to sweat too much. You're still alive. Battered. Maybe a little traumatised, possibly mildly fermented, but alive. You've survived the chamber pots, the sewer gas, the decomposing wallpaper, and the diseases that float like dandelion fluff through the streets. You've tiptoed through graveyards, stood politely in rooms filled with midwifery screams, and now, at long last, you're on your final stroll. One more filthy, fragrant loop through the astonishing, revolting world of Victorian hygiene. Let's take it slow, you've earned that much. You start your walk early, just as the city begins to stir. Horses clip-clop down cobblestones slick with something suspicious. Street sweepers do their best with weak brooms and strong stomachs. A man with a pushcart sells jellied eels by shouting directly into your soul. The smell is fish plus despair. Your boots are already picking up a new layer of grime, but that's fine. You stop trying to keep them clean somewhere around Section 8. You pass a public fountain where a few children are washing their feet. A boy splashes water onto his armpits with the enthusiasm of someone who's only ever known one way to bathe. Next to him, an older woman is scrubbing a bucket, muttering about how the new soap gives her rashes. You pause to chat. She tells you the soap's made with beef tallow, lie and lies. You nod. You believe her. Next stop, a public bathhouse. You've been avoiding this place because you were scared of what you'd find. It's cleaner than expected, but still carries the faint, baked-in scent of wet plaster and too many bodies. The attendant explains that men and women bathe on different days, and that privacy is a negotiable concept. You ask about the water. Reused until it's not water anymore, he says without blinking. Lovely. Inside, you watch a man scrub his back with what looks like a footbrush. Another is washing his socks in the same basin he just dunked his head into. You try not to judge. When access is limited, you use what you have. Hygiene here isn't about perfection, it's about participating. The bar is on the floor, but at least it's present. You stop by a chemist's next. The windows are full of bottles promising things like complexion water, dental elixir, and powder of purity. Inside, a mustachioed man tries to sell you tooth soap with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. He offers you a sample. It smells like peppermint and betrayal. You ask about toothpaste. Too new, he scoffs. No one trusts it yet. You consider buying a jar just to say you tried. Then you remember you've been brushing with charcoal and chewing on mint leaves and decide it's an upgrade. Wandering further, you pass by a schoolyard where children play next to a wall stained with years of rainfall and city breath. You can hear coughing, sharp, persistent. One child wears a scarf even though it's warm out. You wonder how many of them have learned to pretend they aren't sick. In a world where illness is normal, where the smell of infection doesn't raise alarm bells, the line between fine and dying is fuzzy at best. You duck into a church more out of curiosity than faith. It's dim, musty, and smells faintly of candle wax and damp wool. There's a baptism happening. Another tiny baby wrapped in cloth, dunked in water that probably hasn't been changed in days. The priest smiles, the parents beam. You silently hope the water doesn't give the kid conjunctivitis before he gets a chance to grow a tooth. Out again, and you pass a perfumery, a laundress boiling sheets in a huge kettle, and a butcher's shop where the blood's being hosed down the drain into the gutter. A dog drinks from it. You try not to make eye contact. You stop for a bite, questionable meat pie and a mug of small beer. You eat sitting on a stoop watching the people go by. Rich ladies with gloved hands and clenched jaws, men with oil in their hair and dirt in their nails, flower sellers with grime under their petals. The city is a breathing, sweating, coughing organism, 1,000 hygiene routines stitched together with habit and hearsay. And then, the highlight of your day, you meet a man selling health corsets. He claims they straighten the spine, lift the soul, and promote digestion. You ask if they help with sweating. He hesitates. If you sweat less from standing still, then yes. You move on. There's an open sewer running beside the street. You had hoped these were gone, but here it is, gurgling, sluggish, full of mystery. A child tosses in a stick. It disappears without a sound. You wonder how many diseases are floating down that stream right now, waiting for the next unlucky host. You step back quickly. A final quirky fact for the road. Some Victorians believed that one way to avoid disease was to wear a sanitary belt. Not the menstrual kind, but a strap soaked in vinegar and camphor worn around the waist to ward off bad air. Fashion meets paranoia. You're tempted to try it. What's one more layer of stench? You pass the workhouse on your way home. Grey walls, narrow windows, lives are guns stacked like chairs after a long party. People go in but rarely come out looking better. You pause outside the gate, listening to the silence inside. It smells like boiled potatoes, linen soap, and quiet despair. Finally, you're back in your room. The straw mattress creaks, the walls still sweat. You peel off your socks, unsure if they're damp from your feet or the floor. Your body itches with old soap and older dust. But you're done. You've walked the length and width of Victorian hygiene. From the royal chamber pots to the graveyard pits, you've scrubbed with lye, powdered your armpits with starch, and flirted with mildew in more ways than one. You've seen the daily struggle to stay presentable in a world that actively wants to make you rot. Tomorrow you'll wake up and return to your time where hygiene is a baseline and not a prayer. You'll shower with hot water, brush with minty paste, deodorize with something that wasn't invented by panic and citrus peels, and you'll never complain about the dentist's cold hands again. But tonight lie back, let your body remember the weight of grime and the sound of 1,000 chamber pots emptying into the Thames. You've survived the filth. You've earned your soap, now close your eyes, you made it. Not just through a single night's grime, but through the full oozing tapestry of Victorian hygiene, from the first gagging whiff of the streets to the final breath beside a freshly cracked grave. And now, with the chamber pots emptied and the corsets unlaced, you can finally exhale. Breathe in the silence, not the kind broken by a soot-covered urchin or a rat doing laps behind your wall. The real kind, the kind that comes when everything stops moving. You've seen what the Victorians did to survive. The powders, the potions, the weirdly aggressive soaps, the lace masks, the scented gloves, the shared wash basins, the constant war against sweat, stink and shame. They didn't have it easy, but they made it work, in their own strange, uncomfortable way. And beneath all the layers, all the perfume, all the dirt they tried to pretend wasn't dirt, they were just people. Gross, hilarious, hopeful little humans, just like us. So tonight, as your body sinks into your clean sheets and your brain starts to uncoil from all that soot and secondhand cholera, take a moment to appreciate the miracle of hot showers, the magic of toothbrushes, the humble glory of deodorant. You've travelled through the filth and lived to tell the tale. Tomorrow will smell better,